People say that when you cannot see the world, you learn to feel it instead. They say blindness sharpens everything else, that your remaining senses become so acute, so finely tuned, that in some ways you perceive more than those with perfect sight ever could. Seraphina Voss once believed that too. She believed that her hands, her ears, her skin, all of it, had become her eyes, that she could read a room by the shift of air against her cheek, that she could know a person's true nature simply by the way their voice sat in their chest when they spoke to her. She believed she could feel danger before it arrived. She was wrong, because the most dangerous thing in Seraphina's life didn't arrive with a warning tremor or a change in the air. It didn't come with raised voices or the metallic bite of threat. It came wrapped in silk sheets, in the warmth of a fireplace, in the sound of her husband's breathing beside her in the dark. It came from inside the place she had trusted most. And by the time she felt it, by the time her skin finally told her the truth, she was already running barefoot through a storm, with nothing but the thunder to guide her home. Chapter 1. She always woke before him. That was the first thing Seraphina had learned about marriage. That love, real love, had a rhythm to it, and hers began in the quiet space before dawn, when the whole world was still soft and formless, and she could reach across the bed and find Dorian's hand without searching. She found it now. Large, warm, the knuckles slightly rough from years of handling horses and ledgers and the particular brand of careless confidence that wealthy men wore like a second skin. His fingers curled automatically around hers even in sleep, and she felt the familiar pull in her chest, that small, anchoring tenderness that had convinced her, 2 years ago, that she was the luckiest woman in the Aldenmore province. "You're doing it again." His voice came, low and sleep-blurred, from somewhere above her head. She felt the mattress shift as he turned toward her. "Doing what?" "Counting my knuckles." She could hear the smile in it. She hadn't realized she was. Her thumb had been moving across each ridge of his hand, one by one, without conscious thought. She did that sometimes, mapped the people she loved with her fingertips, the way a cartographer maps a coastline, methodically, gratefully. "Good morning to you too," she said. He laughed. That low, comfortable sound that she had catalogued as safe from the very first time she heard it across a dinner table 3 years ago. Dorian Voss laughed with his whole chest. It was one of the things she had loved first about him, before she loved anything else. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. She smelled cedar and sleep warmth, and the faint lavender of the pillowcase that she had chosen herself, because she could identify it in any room, in any darkness. A small domestic landmark in a life built from landmarks. "The rain came in the night," he said, pulling her closer. "I can hear it on the roof." She listened. He was right. A steady, low percussion against the eaves. She felt something ease in her shoulders that she hadn't known was tight. "Good," she said. The garden needed it. This was the architecture of their mornings. Small observations, small comforts, the unspectacular intimacy of two people who had learned each other's shapes in the dark and stopped needing grand gestures to feel close. Seraphina had been blind since the age of 9, a fever that came in winter and took her sight before spring arrived. She barely remembered colors now. Sometimes she tried. She knew that the roses Dorian had planted along the south wall were red, and she pressed that word against her memory of red from childhood and tried to reconstruct something. Usually it dissolved before it fully formed. She had made her peace with that, mostly. What she had never made peace with was the way strangers spoke to her, slowly, loudly, as if blindness were also deafness, also stupidity. The way they aimed their words at Dorian instead of her when they were standing directly in front of her face. Dorian had never done that. From the first moment they met, he had spoken to her directly, looked at her. She knew by the angle of his voice, even knowing she couldn't look back. It was such a simple thing. It had felt, at the time, like everything. "I have business in the East Quarter this morning," he said now, untangling himself gently from her. She heard the soft protest of the floorboards under his weight, the scrape of the wardrobe door, the rustle of fabric. "You'll be all right?" "I'm always all right." "I know." A pause. Then his hand found her cheek briefly. Warm, familiar, there and then gone. "I'll be home before supper." She listened to the sound of him leaving the room. Then she lay still in the warm pocket of the bed he had left behind, listening to the rain, and felt happy. She thought that, clearly and distinctly, in the particular way she sometimes examined her own feelings with the same careful attention she gave everything else she couldn't see. I am happy. This is what happy is. This is enough. The vision came at mid-morning. She was in the sitting room when it struck her, the tea gone cold in her hands, the sound of the rain still steady against the window, the fire crackling low in the grate. She had been listening to the house settle around her, and thinking about nothing in particular. And then the world tilted. It always came like that, sudden, disorienting, like missing a step in the dark, a roaring silence that swallowed sound, and then images that weren't images at all, not really, because she had no visual vocabulary left to build them from. They came to her as sense, smell and voice, and the physical memory of space she had never occupied. She felt herself in a room she didn't know. Stone walls, cold air with a dampness to it that suggested a room not often used. A fireplace that had been lit recently. She could smell the wood smoke, the particular acrid edge of newly caught timber. And voices. 2 voices. One was Dorian's. She recognized it immediately and completely. The way you recognize a voice that has been your compass in every dark room for 2 years. Without thought, without doubt. His voice was her north. Except that the version of his voice she was hearing now was not the version she knew. It was stripped of warmth, low and precise and businesslike in a way that she had never heard from him in private, only in the fragments of his professional conversations she had accidentally overheard. And the other voice she also knew. It belonged to Lyra. Lyra, who was Dorian's younger sister, who brought Seraphina wildflowers she couldn't see and read aloud to her from books of poetry on Sunday afternoons, and had once spent an entire evening helping her relearn a piece of music on the pianoforte that Seraphina had been afraid she would never play again after losing her sight. Lyra, whose voice Seraphina had catalogued as safe from the very beginning, from almost the first day. She was wrong about that too. She still doesn't know? Lyra's voice, hushed, urgent. No. Dorian. Flat. She suspects nothing. A pause. Seraphina, standing in this room she had never stood in, perceiving through senses she didn't understand, felt the cold stone walls as though her own palms were pressed against them. How long? Lyra again. Dorian, how long until... Not long now. His voice shifted, something behind it that she couldn't name. Not guilt, closer to impatience. The amount we've been using is careful, gradual. By the time anyone examines her, it will read as natural decline. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. The amount we've been using, natural decline. She still doesn't know. Seraphina's hands lost their grip on the teacup. She heard it shatter against the floor as the vision collapsed and the sitting room flooded back around her. The fire, the rain, the smell of lavender and home. Her whole body was shaking. The broken cup was scattered across her feet, and she didn't move to avoid it. No, she thought, with the very last rational part of her mind. No, that was a dream, a nightmare, my mind constructing fear from nothing, anxiety wearing the costume of certainty. I am tired. I have been tired lately, that's all. She bent carefully and began gathering the broken pieces of the cup with trembling hands, cutting her finger on an edge without registering the pain. That was not real. She heard them 20 minutes later. She hadn't meant to. She had gone to the kitchen to clean the small cut on her finger, moving through the house along the route she had memorized, left from the sitting room, 14 steps to the corridor, right turn, 7 steps to the kitchen door. She stopped at the top of the service stairs when she heard voices rising from below. Dorian's voice. And Lyra's. No, her mind said again. They are not here. Dorian said he had business in the East Quarter. But she knew his voice. She would know it in a thunderstorm. She would know it underwater. She pressed herself against the wall at the top of the stairs, and she listened with every nerve she had. Can't keep going at this pace, Lyra was saying. Clipped. Private. The voice of someone who believed they were completely alone. If she has another episode, she won't connect it to anything. Dorian's voice, directly below her now, close enough that she could hear the particular resonance of it in the stone stairwell. She's been putting them down to fatigue for months. The dizzy spells, the weakness in the mornings. Lyra paused. Dorian, she trusts us. She loves you. A beat. I know that. His voice was quiet. Not. She searched it desperately for something, any small thread of regret. Not horrified, not broken by what he was saying. Only tired, only practical. But the Aldenmore estate cannot pass to a woman who cannot manage it. Father's will was specific. If I am widowed within the first 3 years, the full inheritance. He stopped. Seraphina heard Lyra say something too low to catch. Then, how much longer until the poison finally claims her? She didn't breathe. She didn't breathe for so long that her vision, which had not existed in 15 years, went white at the edges. Poison. The dizzy spells, the weakness, the tea gone cold in her hands every morning because her hands had been trembling for months, and she had called it. What had she called it? Anxiety, cold weather, fatigue. She had called it everything except what it was. How much longer until the poison finally claims her? Dorian's answer was lost beneath a crack of thunder so violent it shook the window at the end of the corridor. Seraphina turned from the stairs. She walked 14 steps back to the sitting room. She found her cloak on its hook beside the door by feel, her fingers closing over the wool with a grip that left marks. She found her boots, could not make her hands steady enough to lace them, shoved her feet inside unlaced. She found the front door. She found the outside. The rain hit her like a wall. She ran. She had no destination. That was the terror of it, that there was no destination, because every landmark she knew, every left turn and counted step and sensory anchor point, was attached to a life that had just been ripped out from under her like a cloth from a table. She counted steps anyway. It was all she had. The rain was relentless, cold and driving, soaking through her cloak in seconds, plastering her hair to her face. The ground beneath her feet shifted from cobblestone to mud, to gravel, and back to mud, and she had no idea where she was, no idea how far she'd come, no map in her head, because she had never needed a map for beyond the house. The house had been the world. She trusts us. She loves you. I know that. She ran until the unlaced boots caught on something and she fell. Hard, hands out, palms skidding through mud and gravel. She pushed herself up, kept moving. Slower now, arms out, navigating by sound and the feel of the road beneath her feet. The thunder came again, and in the brief illumination of lightning, which meant nothing to her, the world outside lit up for everyone who could see. She could not see. She heard it before she felt it, the enormous sound of wheels on wet road, the hammering percussion of hooves, the shout of a driver above the storm. She turned toward the sound, and that was the wrong direction. She spun, lost her footing again. Something massive and solid struck her. Not the horses. She understood that later, in the seconds of dazed non-comprehension that followed. The carriage wheel had clipped her shoulder as she fell sideways, not dragged her under. She hit the ground and lay there in the mud and rain, while the carriage ground to a halt somewhere above and ahead of her, and the driver's shout became words. The road, woman down. My lord, there is a woman. Then a different voice. Closer. On the ground beside her almost immediately, she heard the soft impact of boots in mud, felt the displacement of air as someone crouched over her. Are you hurt? Low, calm. The kind of calm that didn't come from the absence of urgency, but from something resting underneath urgency like bedrock. A voice that was accustomed to emergencies, and had somewhere, long ago, decided not to be rattled by them. She turned toward it. Her voice came out wrong, too small. I don't know. Don't move yet. Not a command, an instruction. And there was a difference she could hear in the way he said it. I need to know if you can tell me where it hurts. She took inventory, palms shredded, shoulder blazing where the wheel had grazed her. Knee, probably. Head intact, which was the only thing that mattered. My hands, my shoulder. I can move. I think I can move. All right, a pause. She felt him, not touching, just near, his warmth a contrast to the cold rain. I'm going to help you sit up, may I? Such a strange thing to ask, in the middle of the road, in the storm, with her bleeding and disoriented. And he was asking. Yes, she said. His hands found her, careful, deliberate, one at her back and one at her arm, and she was helped upright with a steadiness that suggested significant physical strength applied with precise restraint. She sat in the mud in the rain and turned her face toward his. "I can't see," she said, because it was relevant, because he needed to know why she had been in the middle of the road in a thunderstorm, at what she estimated from the cold was mid-afternoon. "I'm blind. I was running, and I didn't know where the road." "I understand." He said it without the particular quality that the word blind usually produced in strangers. That catch of discomfort, that recalibration. He simply absorbed it and moved forward. "You're safe now. Can you stand?" She could. He helped her. The same careful grip, no more pressure than needed. When she was upright, she found she was unsteady on her feet, and his hand remained at her elbow, not holding her in place but available, present, something she could lean into if she chose. "My carriage is here," he said, "out of the rain. Will you come inside while my physician looks at your hands?" She hesitated. The instinct that said don't get in a stranger's carriage pressed up against the reality that she was bleeding, blind, in a storm, with nowhere to go back to. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "You don't." He paused. "My name is Roman. I'm traveling from the Northern Territory. I have no interest in anything except getting you out of this rain and making sure you're not more badly hurt than you appear." Another pause, and she heard something in it. Not amusement exactly, but something adjacent to it. "For what it's worth, I also have no interest in the fact that you're covered in road mud and crying." She raised a hand to her face. She hadn't realized. "I'm not crying," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "Of course not," he said. "It's raining." For one impossible moment, in the middle of the worst night of her life, she almost laughed. She let him guide her to the carriage. She climbed inside. And somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the terror and the grief and the slow dawning comprehension of what had been done to her in the house she had called home, she registered that his hand had been warm, even through her soaking sleeve. Even in the cold. Warm. The carriage door closed against the rain. What Seraphina Voss did not know, could not see, could not possibly have prepared for, was the way the man called Roman had gone completely still the moment he helped her to her feet. The way his breath had stopped. The way he had looked at her. This woman, bleeding and barefoot and running from something terrible in the dark. And felt the thing that his kind had warned him about, written about, built entire mythologies around. A pull, absolute and annihilating, like gravity discovering a new center. He stood in the rain for 3 more seconds after the carriage door closed, his hand still raised from where it had held her arm. Then his second-in-command appeared at his shoulder and said, very quietly, "My lord, is everything all right?" Roman lowered his hand. "Drive," he said, slowly. He climbed in, and the Alpha King of the Northern Reach sat across from a woman who could not see him, and understood, for the first time in 31 years, what it meant to be completely undone. Chapter 2. The inside of the carriage smelled like leather and pine resin, and something underneath both of those things. Something she had no name for. Something that her newly sharpened, betrayal-raw senses kept returning to without permission. Warm, that was the closest word. Not the warmth of a fire or a heated room, but the warmth of living thing, dense and grounding, like the smell of earth after rain, like the first breath of a forest after a long winter. She had no framework for why a stranger's carriage should smell like safety. She filed it away and said nothing. The physician was a woman, which Seraphina registered with a relief so acute it almost made her dizzy again. Her name was Isolde. She introduced herself before she touched anything, explained each thing before she did it, and had the particular economy of movement that Seraphina associated with people who spent their lives working around other people's pain, and had learned not to waste it. "Your palms took the worst of it," Isolde said, pressing a cloth against Seraphina's right hand with firm, even pressure. "The gravel made small cuts. Nothing deep. They'll heal clean if we keep them wrapped tonight." A pause. "The shoulder will bruise badly. The wheel caught you at an angle. If it had been direct contact, you'd have a break. You were lucky." Lucky, Seraphina thought. The word sat in her chest at a strange angle. "Thank you," she said anyway. Isolde worked in efficient silence for a few minutes, cleaning and wrapping with practiced hands. The carriage moved beneath them, slowly, as Roman had instructed, the wheels finding a more careful rhythm on the wet road. The rain against the roof had gentled from its earlier fury into something steadier and quieter. He was sitting across from her. She knew because she could feel him there, the particular quality of an occupied space, the sound of breathing that was not Isolde's, the sense of attention that had a different texture than absence. He hadn't spoken since climbing in. She didn't know what to do with that. Most people, finding themselves sharing a small enclosed space with someone who had just thrown herself in front of their carriage and couldn't see, tended toward anxious conversation, filling the silence, explaining themselves. He was simply present, quietly, fully present, in a way that took up no more space than it needed and left the rest for her. It was disarming. She resented it slightly. "You should drink this," Isolde said, pressing a small cup into Seraphina's wrapped hands. "It's willow bark, for the pain and the shock." Seraphina drank it without argument. It was bitter and she didn't care. "Where were you running to?" His voice came from across the carriage, not intrusive, not demanding, offered carefully, the way you offer something to someone who might not want it and you want to make clear they can refuse. She considered lying, considered making something up, a story about getting lost, about the storm, about anything other than the truth. She was, after all, in a stranger's carriage with strangers who could be anything, but she was so tired. The kind of tired that had been building for months without her knowing why, and now she knew why, and the weight of knowing had collapsed whatever reserve she had left for performing normalcy. "Nowhere," she said. "I was running from." A silence. Then, "All right." 2 words. No follow-up. No pressing. She turned her face toward him slightly. "That's it?" she said. "All right? You'll tell me more if you want to," he said. "You don't have to want to." She turned this over. "Most people," she said slowly, "would consider that an insufficient answer given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "A blind woman alone in a storm. Running from nothing, she'll explain. In your carriage." "Ah." She heard something shift in his voice. Not quite amusement. Something more careful than that. "Most people would also consider it unusual that she's handling the situation with considerably more composure than most sighted people I've encountered in similar states." "I've had practice," she said, "with situations I can't see clearly." A beat. "I imagine you have," he said quietly. Isolde finished wrapping Seraphina's hands and sat back. "The cuts need to breathe by morning," she said. "I'll rewrap them then. For now, rest, if you can. Shock does its worst work when you don't give the body time to process it." Seraphina nodded. Isolde moved. She heard her settle back, heard the small sounds of medical supplies being repacked. The carriage rocked gently. The rain persisted. And then Seraphina felt it. The thing that had been coiled at the back of her awareness since she had climbed in. The thing her body had been tracking underneath the pain and the fear and the willow bark bitterness. The thing she had been trying to attribute to shock or injury or simple proximity. A pull. Not metaphorical, not emotional, or not only emotional, physical, an actual, measurable gravitational quality to the space across the carriage from her, a warmth that seemed to have a direction, a source, a specificity that made no rational sense. She pressed her wrapped hands together in her lap and said nothing. They stopped at an inn an hour later. She knew it was an inn by the sounds, the shout of the stable boy, the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat, the clamor of voices behind a door that opened and then muffled again. The rain had slowed to something almost peaceful. Roman appeared at the carriage door before anyone else could open it. "There are rooms," he said. "Isolde will stay with you tonight if you're willing, or you can have a room alone, whatever you prefer." "I'd like to know," Seraphina said carefully, "what this is costing you." A pause. Nothing. "That's not what I meant." Another pause. Longer. She had the impression he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. She was accustomed to that gap. She had spent 15 years learning to close it with sound and air and instinct, and usually she managed. Right now she couldn't tell what he was thinking at all, and it bothered her more than it should have. It's costing me nothing I'm not glad to spend, he said. There's no debt here. You're hurt. It's a bad night. That's the whole of it. She weighed this. Isolde can stay, she said. Thank you. He helped her down from the carriage. The ground was wet cobblestone. She felt it through her ruined boots, and he kept his hand at her elbow through the inn yard until she asked him to describe the entrance, and then she walked to it herself. She heard him not commenting on this, which was its own form of courtesy. The room was small and warm, fire already lit. Isolde had clearly preceded them and arranged things, because when Roman walked Seraphina to the threshold and described the room's layout, bed to the left, 6 steps from the door, table and chair at the right, fire straight ahead, 12 steps. He did it with a detail and patience that suggested he had either asked Isolde what to say, or had, somehow, known instinctively what she would need. The window latch is here, he said, guiding her hand to it. It's stuck. It won't open accidentally. You don't have to worry about it. I don't worry about windows, she said. I know. And she heard that he did know. Not performing the knowledge, but actually holding it. Actually having taken in what she told him and restructured his understanding around it without being asked. I was thinking about the draft. The room gets cold if it comes open. She stood at the threshold for a moment. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. The question came out more plainly than she intended, stripped of the social softening she usually applied to direct things. The night had burned away her capacity for cushioning. He was quiet for long enough that she started to regret asking. Because you needed someone to be, he said finally. It was such a simple answer, such a completely simple, unadorned answer, no agenda in it that she could hear, no performance. She nodded once and went inside. She didn't sleep. She lay in the warm dark, which was the same as any other dark, which was the same as the inside of her eyelids, which was the same as it had been since she was 9 years old, and she thought about Dorian. She thought about 2 years of mornings, 2 years of his hand finding hers automatically in sleep, 2 years of his voice aimed directly at her face, speaking to her and not around her, and how that small thing had felt like love, had felt like being chosen. The amount we've been using is careful, gradual. How much longer until the poison finally claims her? She pressed her wrapped hands against her mouth and did not make a sound. She thought, I need to know how bad it is. She thought, I need to know if I'm dying. She thought, I need to know what the poison has done to me, how long it's been, how much damage. And underneath all of it, quieter and more frightening than the rest, I need to know what I do now. Because she was blind and alone, and her hands were wrapped in bandages, and the only person who had been kind to her tonight was a man named Roman whom she had met 40 feet from his carriage wheel, who had asked permission before touching her, who had described a room's layout in careful spatial terms without being prompted, who smelled like pine resin and warm earth, and something she kept trying not to notice. Stop, she told herself. She was catastrophically alone, and she was not going to construct an attachment to the first person who had been decent to her. That was exactly how she had ended up married to Dorian Voss. She breathed carefully in the dark. She listened to the rain. And then she heard it. Outside the window, below, in the inn yard, voices, 2 of them, speaking in low, urgent tones that they clearly believed the night and the rain would cover. She wasn't supposed to be able to hear this. She knew she wasn't supposed to be able to hear this. She was on the 2nd floor and the window was closed, and they were across the yard and whispering. But her hearing, she had long since accepted, was not entirely natural, had not been entirely natural since the fever that took her sight, as if whatever she had lost in one sense had been redistributed into others, with a generosity that exceeded biology. She heard them. Confirmed traveling party, 6 men in northern livery. A voice she didn't know. Tracker's report? This voice she did know. Roman. Stripped of the warmth from earlier. Back to that bedrock calm, harder underneath. Movement in the valley road. Someone followed you out of the northern pass. A silence. How many? 12, at minimum, armed. Another silence. Seraphina lay completely still, hands pressed flat against the mattress. They'll know we've stopped here, Roman said. Yes, my lord. My lord. Not, Roman who was traveling from the Northern Territory, not a simply named man with a physician and a well-appointed carriage. My lord. She filed this away. Double the watch. Don't wake the household. No panic, no signal. I want them to think we're unaware. And the woman, my lord. A pause that lasted precisely 4 seconds. She counted. She stays, he said. No one touches that room. Footsteps. The voice of the second man receding across the yard. Then, silence, except for the rain. Seraphina lay in the dark and thought about 12 armed men in a valley road, and a man who was called my lord, who had nevertheless described her room to her in careful spatial terms, and asked permission before he touched her shoulder. She thought about running again, calculated it, the layout of the room, the stairs, the inn-yard, the road, calculated what running blind into a valley with 12 armed men would accomplish. She stayed, but she did not sleep. And sometime before dawn, in that formless space between exhaustion and consciousness, something happened that she had no framework for at all, something she would not be able to explain for a long time, and would not fully understand until much later. She felt him. Not heard, not sensed in any way she had a word for. Felt, as if the wall between her room and the corridor outside had become briefly permeable, as if someone standing guard on the other side of her door was broadcasting something wordless and specific in her direction. She was safe. It wasn't a thought, it wasn't even a feeling, exactly. It was more like a fact her body had received without consulting her mind. The way you know without looking that the fire behind you is still burning. The way you know without touching that the hand you've memorized is the right one. She pressed her face into the pillow. Don't, she thought. But her heart rate slowed, and she slept. She woke to a detail she hadn't expected. Birdsong, the absence of rain, and the particular quality of light, which she couldn't see but could always somehow feel along her skin, a change in temperature and pressure that her body had learned to read as morning, pressing against the closed curtains. And a voice, just outside the door. Low, measured, speaking to someone in tones she wasn't meant to hear but heard anyway. She's my mate, Caius. I need you to understand what that means before you say another word about leaving her behind. Silence from whoever Caius was. We ride when she's ready, not before. Seraphina sat up in the inn bed with her wrapped hands in her lap, and her heart doing something violent and disorganized in her chest. Mate. She didn't know what that word meant. Not in the way he had used it. Not in that absolute, territorial, geological way. Not with that weight behind it. It wasn't the word a man used for a woman he'd helped out of a road 2 hours ago. It wasn't any ordinary word at all. She was still sitting there, turning it over, when a knock came at the door. It's Roman, he said, before she could ask. May I come in? She pulled in a breath. Yes, she said. The door opened. He came in, and even not seeing him, even with only the displacement of air, and the shift in the room's warmth and the direction of his breathing, she knew, in a way she had no language for, and no defense against. Something is beginning. Something she had not asked for. Something she was in no condition to survive. Something that, against every piece of evidence her life had just handed her about the cost of trusting warmth, she wanted. Chapter 3. He sat in the chair by the fire. She knew because she heard him pull it. The scrape of wood against the floor, deliberate and unhurried, and then the soft protest of the frame as he settled into it. Not across the room, not at a careful, socially appropriate distance, close enough that when he spoke, she didn't have to turn her head to aim her attention at him. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him again. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her wrapped hands in her lap, and her spine very straight, the way she always sat when she needed to feel capable. Posture as armor. It had served her well for 15 years. You heard us, he said. Last night, in the yard. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. There was no point in pretending otherwise. She had already decided, somewhere in the thin hours of the morning, that she was done pretending. That particular luxury had expired. How much? 12 armed men in the valley road. Someone followed you out of the northern pass. She paused. And the last part. Before you came back inside. A silence. She heard him breathe in once, slowly, processing. "Your hearing," he said. "It's not normal?" She kept her voice even. "No. It hasn't been since the fever. I don't fully understand it myself. It has a range that doesn't make anatomical sense." She tilted her head slightly. "You're not afraid of that?" "No. Most people are. When they find out. Most people," he said quietly, "have never met someone whose senses compensate the way yours do." A pause. "I have." She filed this, added it to the growing inventory of things about Roman that didn't fit any category she had. "The word you used," she said. "Mate." She kept her voice neutral, clinical, almost. "I know what it means in common usage. I don't think that's how you meant it." The fire shifted, a log settling, a brief surge of warmth. He didn't answer immediately, and she had the impression of someone choosing their words the way a careful traveler chooses a path across uncertain ground. "No," he said, "it's not." "Then explain it to me." Another pause. Then, "How much do you know about the Northern Territory?" She considered. "It borders the Aldenmore province to the north. Governed by... The accounts differ. I've heard Lord and King, and once, in a very old text, Alpha. The territory is closed to most outsiders. There are stories." She stopped. "Stories I always assumed were folklore." "What kind of stories?" "Wolves," she said. "People who are also wolves. A separate civilization that's run parallel to the human provinces for centuries, without ever quite intersecting." She paused. "Stories that small children are told at bedtime, usually to encourage them not to wander into the northern woods at night." "And now," he said, "sitting here, what do you think?" She thought about 12 armed men in a valley road. She thought about a physician who had moved through the darkness of that inn-yard, as if darkness were irrelevant. She thought about Roman himself, the quality of his stillness, the temperature of his hands even in a cold rain, the way the word mate had come out of him like something geological, like something older than language. "I think," she said carefully, "that you're about to tell me the stories are not entirely folklore." "No," he said, "they're not." She nodded once, absorbed this, set it beside everything else she was absorbing. "And mate," she said, "in your world, what does that mean exactly?" He was quiet for long enough that the fire had time to shift again. "It means the person your wolf recognizes," he said. "Not chooses, recognizes, as if it already knew, as if it's been waiting." He stopped. "It happens rarely, sometimes not at all in a lifetime. When it does, it's..." He paused again. "Absolute is the closest word I have." She sat with this. "You felt that," she said. "Last night, when you found me in the road." "Yes. You barely knew me." "I know." His voice had something in it now, rueful, and underneath the rue, something much more unguarded. "Believe me, I'm aware of how that sounds." "It sounds insane," she said. "Yes." "I was covered in road mud. I noticed. And crying. It was raining," he said, with the same careful gravity he'd used the night before, and she felt something loosen in her chest. Something she immediately tried to tighten back up, because it was funny. Because he was funny, quietly and without effort, in the way that only people who are genuinely at ease with themselves ever manage to be. She pressed her lips together. "I have to tell you something," she said, and the looseness closed back up entirely. "About why I was running." "You don't have to." "I know," she breathed in. "I'm telling you anyway, because you told me something real just now, and that it feels like it requires something in return." She paused. "And because I need someone to know. I need someone outside of that house to know what was happening inside it." She told him. Not all of it. Not the years, not the mornings, not the architecture of a marriage she'd built on counted steps and memorized knuckles, and a voice aimed at her face instead of around it. She told him the bones, the vision, the voices on the stairs, the specific words she had heard in the specific order she had heard them. She told him natural decline, and how much longer, and the amount we've been using. She told him calmly, and without interruption, and when she finished, the room was very quiet except for the fire. "How long have you felt unwell?" he said. "Months," she said it flatly. "I called it fatigue, anxiety. I should have. She stopped. The should-haves were a precipice she couldn't afford right now. The dizzy spells started perhaps 4 months ago. The weakness in the mornings. I thought I was simply... She stopped again. I trusted him. I know, he said. I'm not. Her voice almost broke and she caught it. Held it. I'm not asking for pity. I'm telling you because you need to know why I was in that road. Why I can't go back. Why I don't. She pressed her wrapped hands together. I have nowhere to go. Silence. You have somewhere to go, he said. She turned her face toward him. My territory, he said. My healers are the best in the northern reaches. Better than anything in the human provinces. If there's still a substance in your system, they'll find it and they'll remove it. He stopped. And you'll be safe. I can promise you that with considerably more certainty than I can promise most things. Because of the mate bond, she said. Because of the mate bond, he agreed. And because it's my territory, and nothing moves through it without my knowledge. He paused. But I want to be clear. This is an offer, not a command. You're not obligated by what I felt last night. You're not obligated by anything. She thought about this. You're very careful, she said, to give me choices. You've had choices taken from you, he said quietly. I have no interest in adding to that list. She opened her mouth to respond. And the vision took her. It came faster than usual. No tilting, no warning. One moment she was sitting on the edge of an inn bed in the morning warmth, and the next she was elsewhere, sensation flooding her from all directions at once. Cold stone under her palms. Not the cold of disuse this time, but the cold of night air, of outdoors. The smell of blood. Not old blood, not the dried copper smell of aftermath, but fresh, immediate, arterial. The kind of smell that meant someone was bleeding right now, right here, in this place she was standing in. Voices, but distorted. Too many of them, overlapping, impossible to separate. The clash of metal, screaming that cut off mid-note. And then one voice, rising above the rest. Roman. She knew his voice now. Had memorized it in the small hours of one night the way she memorized everything that mattered. Completely, involuntarily, bone deep. He was in pain. Not the controlled pain of a man holding himself together. The involuntary kind. The sound that gets out before you can stop it. That comes from somewhere beneath intention, or dignity, or the bedrock calm that was apparently his natural register. She felt, not saw, never saw, but felt in the particular way visions gave her information. The weight of many against one. An ambush, not a battle. A specific, deliberate, arranged ambush. And she felt, with a certainty she couldn't account for, that it happened soon. She felt herself reach for him, her hands out, finding nothing, finding the absence where a person should be, and then the vision released her like a caught breath, and she was back in the room, gasping, her hands outstretched toward where Roman was sitting. He was on his knees in front of her. She didn't know when he'd moved. He was simply there, not touching her, hands hovering near her arms, voice low and steady, and continuous, in a way that told her he had been speaking for several seconds. Still here. You're in the room. The fire is behind you to the right. I'm right here, Seraphina. She grabbed his wrists. Both hands, wrapped in bandages that immediately made the gesture clumsy, but her grip was accurate, and she held on and it grounded her. The warmth of him under her fingers, the pulse she could feel through the thin skin at his wrist, steady and fast and real. You're going to be ambushed, she said. He went very still. The valley road, she said. The men following you. They're not following to track. They're waiting. There's a point between here and wherever you're going, and they're waiting there. She was still holding his wrists. She couldn't make herself let go. I felt blood. I felt you. You were... She stopped. It hasn't happened yet. I don't know how long. He was quiet for 2 full seconds. This has happened before, he said. The visions. Since the fever. Since the same fever that took my sight. She breathed. I see things that have happened elsewhere. Sometimes, things that haven't happened yet. I never know which until... She gestured helplessly with their joined hands. Until they happen. How accurate are they? Always. She said it without hesitation. I've never seen something that didn't come to pass. Sometimes I couldn't prevent it. She felt his hands turn under her grip, not pulling away, but shifting, so that his fingers wrapped around her wrapped hands instead, holding them. Carefully, the bandages considered. "Can you describe what you felt?" he said. "Anything specific? The ground, the sounds, the quality of the air?" She could. She did. He listened to every word with an attention so complete and so still that she felt it the way you feel a room getting warmer. Not one single moment of increase, but an accumulated, undeniable change. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The Arrowmere crossing," he said, mostly to himself. "That's the only point on our route where the road narrows between rock faces." He paused. "They know our route." "Someone told them." "Yes. Someone in your party." A silence, heavier than the ones before. "Yes," he said again. She absorbed this. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." His voice was steady, but she heard something shift beneath it. A controlled anger, precise and cold. Nothing like the hot kind. The kind that sits in the chest for a long time and knows how to wait. "It tells me what I needed to know." He paused. "Thank you." She became aware, suddenly, that they were still holding each other's hands. She released him. He didn't move away immediately. He was still close. Close enough that when he turned his head to look at her, she felt the shift of displaced air against her cheek. "I need to speak with Caius," he said. "Will you be all right for a few minutes?" "I'm always all right," she said, with exactly the same tone she'd used the night before. She heard the smile in the silence before he stood. "I know," he said. "I'm starting to understand that." He moved toward the door. She heard him pause at the threshold. "Seraphina." She turned. "The offer stands," he said. "When this is resolved, when we're on the other side of whatever this morning holds, the offer stands." She said nothing. She heard the door close. And she sat in the warm morning room with her hands in her lap and the visions still echoing through her nervous system, his voice in pain, her hands reaching for empty air, and understood, with the particular clarity that came after visions, that she was not in the road anymore. She had stopped running. She just didn't know yet what she was running toward. Outside the door she could hear low voices, Roman and Caius, rapid and clipped, reorganizing the plan for the morning in light of what she'd told them. She heard her name once, heard the word mate again, quiet and matter of fact, the way you state a thing that is simply true. She heard Caius say, "She saw all of that? From a vision?" She heard Roman say, "Every detail checked out against our own intelligence. Every single one." A pause. "My lord," Caius said, and his voice had changed, less reluctant now, more something else, more careful. "If she can see." "I know," Roman said. "That changes things considerably." "I know," Roman said again, and then quieter. "Don't you think I know that?" Silence. Then the sound of boots on the corridor floor, moving away. Seraphina sat with her hands in her lap and the fire behind her, and thought about a man in pain in a narrow road between rock faces, and thought about 12 armed men who knew someone's route, and thought about a poison that had been careful and gradual and patient for 4 months while she called it fatigue. She thought about all the things she had not seen coming. She thought about this, whatever this was, that she had felt approaching since the moment a stranger's warm hands had found her in the rain. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs. "All right," she thought. "All right. See it coming this time." Chapter 4. She heard the argument before she was part of it. Caius, she had constructed him from sound alone over the course of the morning, a voice that lived high in the chest, clipped consonants, the particular cadence of a man who had spent years issuing orders and receiving them, and had developed a professional allergy to uncertainty. Caius did not want her at the crossing. "She's injured," he said. Through the door she had opened 6 inches without announcing herself. "She's blind. She's been poisoned for 4 months, and she's a civilian." "I heard the ambush before your scouts did," she said. A pause. She pushed the door the rest of the way open and stepped through. She had rewrapped her own hands that morning, clumsily, the bandages looser than Isolde would have approved, and laced her boots with the focused, unhurried attention she gave to anything that required precision from uncooperative hands. She had found water and washed her face. She had not found a mirror and had not needed one. She stood in the corridor between the two men and aimed her attention at the space where Caius's voice had come from. "I heard the ambush," she said again. "I can tell you the number of heartbeats in a room. I can hear a crossbow being drawn from 40 yards in the dark. I cannot fight, I won't pretend otherwise, but I can tell you exactly where everyone is, and whether they've moved, and when they're about to move. That's not a civilian skill." Silence. "She's right," Roman said. "My lord." "She's right, Caius." His voice came from her left, closer than she'd expected, close enough that she adjusted her orientation slightly without thinking about it. "We've lost the advantage of surprise. What we have instead is information. Real-time, accurate, better than anything our scouts can provide in a narrow pass with rock faces on both sides." A pause. "She stays close to me. That's not negotiable." She heard Caius exhale through his nose, the specific sound of a man revising his position without being entirely happy about it. "Fine," he said. "Close to you. Not in the line of anything." "Agreed," Seraphina said, before Roman could answer for her. Another pause. Then, to her mild surprise, Caius made a sound that was almost, a compressed laugh. "Right," he said. "Let's move." They rode 2 hours before the road began to change. She felt it, the quality of sound shifting as rock faces closed in on either side, the echo of hoofbeats developing a new texture, the wind cutting off as the natural walls rose. The temperature dropped 4 degrees at least. She tracked it against her skin. She was on horseback, Roman's horse, in front of Roman, which had been presented to her as the most practical arrangement and which she had accepted on those terms and no others. His presence behind her was a continuous, warm pressure, and she was not thinking about it. She was listening. 4 on the left ridge, she said quietly. "They've been still for a while. I can hear breathing but no movement." She tilted her head. 2 more further along the right face, higher up. One of them is nervous. His breathing is off-pattern. Behind her, she felt Roman relay this in a voice too low for normal hearing to catch. To Caius, who was riding immediately to their left. "Anything ahead?" Roman murmured, close to her ear. She listened. "Someone on the road itself," she said. 100 yards, perhaps. Trying to be still, not managing it. He's shifting his weight every few seconds, left foot to right. Standing on uneven ground and his boots don't fit well. She paused. There might be more further. The echo starts to fold back on itself past the next bend, and it gets harder to separate. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She felt him signal. Not heard it, but felt the shift of his arm near her shoulder, the slight movement of his weight. Then she felt something else. A change in him, subtle, running beneath the surface the way a current runs under still water. A change in temperature, in the quality of his breathing, in some fundamental frequency she had no scientific framework for, but had been tracking all morning with the same instinctive precision she tracked everything. He was not entirely Roman anymore. Or rather, he was more entirely Roman than he had been. Something older and less negotiated was rising in him, controlled but present, pressing against the surface of the careful and deliberate man she'd spent the morning with. She stored this, filed it, did not react. "When it starts," he said quietly, "you're going to feel the horse move. Don't fight it. She's trained for this. She'll keep low and keep to the wall. Stay down and stay on." "I know how to ride," she said. "I know you do." His voice was calm, steady. "I'm talking about staying on during what I'm about to do, which is somewhat different." She did not ask what he was about to do. She thought she already knew. It started with the man on the road. He stepped out. She heard him, heard the scrape of boot on stone and the particular intake of breath that preceded a shout. And Roman's horse surged forward and sideways simultaneously, in a movement that drove Seraphina's stomach into her ribs. She stayed on. The world became sound and motion, and the screaming whip of cold air passed her face. She catalogued it in real time, automatically, the same way she had catalogued every room and road and conversation of her life, not because she had decided to, but because her mind did not know how to process the world any other way. Left ridge, movement now, all 4 of them at once, the distinctive crack of crossbow fire. Right face. The nervous one had calmed, which meant he had something to focus on, which meant he was aiming at something specific. Right face, she said sharply. The high one. He has a line on something to your right. Roman moved. She didn't know how. She felt it rather than understood it. The horse banking left, and the simultaneous sensation of him not being entirely behind her anymore. Something that was not quite a man taking up space in the air above the saddle. And then a sound from the right ridge that she processed, as a body hitting rock and sliding. She didn't ask. The road ahead. The man with the bad boots is running, she said. He's going left. No. He stopped. Something stopped him. Caius, Roman said, close again, completely calm. 3 minutes. That was all it took. 3 minutes of her voice running in a continuous low thread. Left, 2 of them together. The far one is retreating. Someone's climbing down the rock face on the right, 30 yards back and descending fast. And something being done about each thing before she had finished naming it. Then silence. The particular silence of aftermath. No breath holding, no weight of imminence. Just the hollow acoustic of a stone corridor with no active threat in it. She realized her hands were gripping the front of the saddle hard enough to feel it through the bandages. She made herself release. Seraphina, Roman, behind her, his voice different than it had been during the crossing, rougher at the edges, like something had burned away a surface layer. Are you hurt? She took inventory. No. You're certain? Yes, she paused. Are you? A beat. Yes, he said. She didn't entirely believe him. She filed that too. Caius appeared. She heard his horse, heard him pull up alongside them. For a moment he said nothing. Every position she named, he said finally. Every single one. Yes, Roman said. Another silence. My lord. Caius's voice had changed, had lost the clipped professional edge and settled into something more direct, more human. She should come to the keep. I know, Roman said. Not because of the, obviously, because of the bond, but, separately from that, on her own merits, she should. Caius, my lord. I know, Roman said again, quieter. She's coming to the keep. Seraphina sat between them on the horse in the narrow pass between rock faces and said nothing. Let them speak about her in the third person, which she usually resented fiercely, because this particular instance of it felt different. It felt like 2 people recognizing something, not dismissing, not deciding on her behalf, recognizing, the way you recognize a landmark you weren't expecting to find. We should keep moving, she said. If those 12 had any further support behind them. She's right, Caius said immediately, and she heard something in it that was close to warmth. Move out. They stopped an hour past the crossing to water the horses. Roman helped her down with the same careful grip as before. One hand, offered rather than assumed, and she took it and found the ground and released him. The air here was colder, cleaner, carrying a mineral quality she associated with altitude. We crossed into Northern Territory 20 minutes ago, he said, from somewhere to her right. You'll feel the elevation for a day or 2 until you adjust. How much further to the keep? 3 hours, in good conditions. A pause. Less if we push the pace. She heard him move. The sound of him crouching, she thought, near the horses. The splash of water. She turned her face into the wind and felt the change in it. The Northern Territory wind was different from the Aldenmore wind. She already knew this. It had a different weight, a different density, something that moved through it like a pulse. The men following you, she said. They knew your route. You said that meant someone in your party told them. Yes. You know who. A pause. I have a very strong suspicion. You haven't confronted them. Not yet. She considered. Why not? Because confronting them here, in the open, with limited options, creates more problems than it solves. His voice was measured, not evasive. She had learned in 12 hours that Roman did not evade. He simply rationed. He said what was necessary, and trusted the recipient to work with it. At the keep, I have options. Here I have rocks and wet road. She almost smiled. Practical, she said. When possible. She heard him stand. Heard him move toward her. Not quickly. Not with any agenda in the movement. just covering the distance between where he'd been and where she was. He stopped a few feet away. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know that whatever you answer doesn't change the offer I made this morning." She turned toward him. "Ask." "The visions." He paused. "The one this morning. You reached out. Your hands went out, toward where I would have been standing if I hadn't already moved to you." A pause. "Has that happened before?" "In a vision, reaching for someone specific." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "Not in any vision. No." He absorbed this. She heard him breathe in slowly. "All right," he said, and then quieter. "Thank you for telling me." She didn't answer, because what she would have had to say was, "I reached for you before I knew I was doing it. My hands knew where you were before I'd thought about where you were. And when I grabbed your wrists to ground myself, the vision stopped feeling like drowning and started feeling like surfacing." And she was not ready to say that. She was not ready to say that to anyone, let alone to the man it was about, let alone 24 hours after discovering that the last man whose warmth she had trusted had been poisoning her through her morning tea for 4 months. "We should keep moving," she said instead. "Yes," he agreed. They kept moving. The keep appeared in her senses long before anyone announced it. Sound first, a change in the echoes, something massive and vertical altering the way noise moved through the air. Then smell. Wood smoke and pine, and the particular cold clean scent of stone that had stood for centuries. Then, faint but undeniable, the sound of people. Many people. A settlement. "The keep," Roman said, from beside her. They had ridden the last hour side by side on the wider northern road, his horse close enough to hers that she could track his position by proximity alone. "How large?" she asked. "Large." A pause, and she heard him choosing. 1,000 people within the outer walls, more in the surrounding settlement. He paused again. "It's been my home since I was 7 years old. I want to tell you that before you hear it from someone else." She processed this. "Home," she said. "Not just territory." "Both," he said. "It can be both." She nodded slowly. They passed through a gate. She heard the mechanism, the guards, the low exchange of passwords or signals, the heavy reverberation of stone walls close on either side. The sounds of the settlement rose around her, and she began, automatically, cataloging, mapping, building the architecture of the place from its acoustic signature. Large central space, courtyard probably, water, somewhere close, the gurgle of a fountain or a channel. Metal and smoke from the right, forge. Voices from above, suggesting height and multiple levels. Underneath everything, that same dense, warm earth smell she associated with Roman, amplified now, generalized, belonging to the place the way a person's smell belongs to their home. She heard the murmur move through the courtyard as they entered. She couldn't make out words at first, just the ripple of reaction, that specific sound of a crowd adjusting its attention. Then, closer, someone whose voice carried, "Who is she?" And closer still, someone answering, in a tone of profound bewilderment, "I have absolutely no idea." Then another voice, female, sharp, coming from ahead of them and to the left. "Roman, you're 2 days late. You took the Arrowmere crossing after I specifically told you not to, and you've come back with a stranger and a physician's worth of bandaging." A pause. "Start talking." Roman made a sound that she hadn't heard from him before. A compressed, rueful exhale that was almost a laugh. "Hello, Petra," he said. "Don't hello Petra me. Who is this?" Seraphina straightened her spine. "My name is Seraphina Voss," she said, aiming her voice at where the woman's had come from. "I was in the road. Roman found me." She paused. "I'm told the healers here are excellent." A silence. Then the woman called Petra said, in a completely different tone, "Oh." And then, "Oh, Roman." And then, with what sounded like the specific tenderness of someone who had known a person for a very long time and was currently watching something momentous happen to them. "Oh, Petra," Roman said quietly. "Warning." "Right," a brisk recalibration. "Right, yes, healers. Seraphina. May I call you Seraphina?" "Yes. I'm Petra. I run this keep, in the sense that Roman would be completely lost without me. though he's too proud to admit it. Come with me. We'll get you seen to properly, fed something that isn't in food, and put in a room that actually has a window that closes all the way. Seraphina heard Roman say, very quietly, from beside her, "You'll like her." She heard Petra say, equally quietly, but clearly intending to be heard, "She already likes me. Everyone likes me." And despite everything, despite the poison, and the crossing, and the vision that had shown her Roman bleeding in a narrow pass, and the 2 years of careful, loving, deliberate betrayal she was still carrying in her chest like a stone, Seraphina laughed. Small, brief, but real. She heard Roman go still at the sound of it. She couldn't be certain, it was subtle, it was very subtle, something like relief in the stillness. Like he had been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for exactly that. Chapter 5. The healer's name was Soren. She knew this because Petra told her 3 times in the walk from the courtyard to the healing wing, once as introduction, once as reassurance, and once in the particular tone of someone who wanted to make absolutely certain that the person being handed off understood they were being handed to someone competent and not merely convenient. Soren has been the keep's head healer for 19 years, Petra said, guiding Seraphina through a corridor that turned twice and then opened. She felt the ceiling rise, the acoustics expand, into a larger room. He's examined everyone from stable hands to visiting dignitaries, and he has never once been wrong about anything, which is both reassuring and occasionally insufferable. "I can hear you, Petra," said a voice from across the room. "That's the point, Soren." The voice was older, not elderly, but seasoned, carrying the specific unhurried quality of someone who had spent decades in rooms where panic was counterproductive and had simply trained themselves out of it. It aimed itself directly at Seraphina. "Seraphina Voss," he said. Not a question. "Yes." Roman sent word ahead with one of the riders. "I know the broad outline." He paused. "I'd like to hear it from you, if you're willing, in as much detail as you can give me." She gave him detail. She had organized it on the ride, the timeline of symptoms, the sequence of their appearance, the specific quality of each one mapped against what she knew about her own body's baseline. 4 months of dizziness, catalogued by frequency and duration. The weakness in the mornings, not generalized fatigue but a specific heaviness in her limbs that lifted through the day and returned by nightfall. The occasional nausea she had attributed to nerves. The strange, periodic numbness in her fingers that she had frightened herself with before convincing herself it was nothing. It was not nothing. Soren listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to examine you," he said. "Specifically, I want to look at your hands, the skin, the nail beds, and I need to draw a small amount of blood. Standard procedure, nothing alarming." He paused. "I'll explain everything I'm doing as I do it, and if at any point you want me to stop, say so and I will." "All right," she said. She heard Petra settle into a chair nearby, the sound of someone making themselves comfortable for a duration, not intending to leave. Soren's examination was thorough and quiet. He unwrapped her hands first, assessed the cuts from the road with brief, efficient attention, rewrapped them with the practiced speed of someone who had done it thousands of times. Then he held her hands differently, not the clinical grip of wound assessment, but something more careful, his thumbs moving slowly across her palms and up to her fingertips. He said. "That's not a word," Seraphina said. "No," he agreed. "It's a sound. A word comes next." He moved to her wrists, her forearms. The nail beds show some disruption. The kind of banding I associate with sustained low-level toxic exposure. Not acute poisoning. Chronic. He paused. "The fact that you're sitting here having a conversation with me suggests the dosage was carefully managed. High enough to create deterioration. Low enough to avoid triggering the kind of acute symptoms that would have been immediately identified." She absorbed this. "They wanted it to look natural," she said. "Yes, the word that comes to mind is patient." His voice was neutral, not cold, but calibrated. The neutrality of someone who knew that emotional temperature was a clinical choice. This was planned well in advance and executed carefully. Whoever managed the dosage knew what they were doing. She thought of Lyra who brought wildflowers and read poetry on Sunday afternoons and had, apparently, also known what she was doing. "Can you remove it?" she said. What remains of it, yes. Your body has been working against it on its own. Your system is stronger than they accounted for, I think. What I can do will accelerate that considerably. He stepped back. I want to take the blood sample now, if you're ready. Yes. It was quick. A small lancet, pressure, brief sting, done. I'll have preliminary results within the hour, he said. In the meantime, I want you to eat something. Drink the preparation I'll send with you. It's unpleasant, but functional. And rest if you can. A pause. And Seraphina. Yes? You were not imagining the symptoms, he said. I want to say that clearly, because people in your situation, where the source of harm was also the source of comfort, often spend considerable time afterward doubting the reliability of their own perception. He paused. Your perception was accurate. Your body was telling you the truth. You listened to it. You're here. She sat with this for a moment. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Eat something. Petra walked her to a room. It was larger than the inn-room. She could tell by the way sound moved in it, the longer echo, the sense of space above her head. The window was real, properly closing, north-facing by the quality of the air that came through the gap at the bottom. The bed was positioned against the left wall, 7 steps from the door. There was a chair by the fire, and a table near the window, and a small chest at the foot of the bed. Petra described all of this without being asked. Seraphina noticed. You've done this before, she said. Described a room to someone. A brief pause. Roman's grandmother was blind, Petra said, from birth. She lived in the keep until she was 91, and she was the sharpest person I've ever known in my life, including Roman, and I say that with full knowledge that he'll probably somehow hear me. She paused. She taught me that describing a room the right way, spatially, usefully, without condescension, was the difference between making someone feel at home and making them feel managed. Seraphina was quiet for a moment. She sounds remarkable, she said. She was. Petra's voice was warm. She would have had opinions about you. Good opinions or bad ones. With her, those were frequently the same thing. The chair scraped, Petra sitting down. You don't have to talk. I'm not here to extract information. I'm here because Roman asked me to make sure you had company if you wanted it, and quiet if you didn't. A pause. He's very precise about consent, our Roman. It's either his best quality or his most exhausting one, depending on the day. How long have you known him? Seraphina asked. Since he was 14 and I was 12, and he let me win a foot race because he thought I needed the confidence boost, which I didn't, and which I've never forgiven him for. Petra said this with great affection. 20 years, give or take. Is he? She stopped, reorganized. Is he a good king? The word sat between them. You knew, Petra said, not accusatory, observational. I heard Caius call him my lord, and the carriage, the livery, the physician traveling with the party, the number of guards. She paused. I'm blind. I'm not unobservant. No, Petra said. You're really not. A pause. Is he a good king? She appeared to consider this seriously. He's a fair king. He's a patient king. He's the kind of king who remembers the names of the people who work in his kitchens, and the kind who will absolutely destroy you if you threaten something he considers his to protect. She paused. He's been the alpha king of the Northern Reach since he was 22, which is young to carry that, and he's carried it without it hollowing him out, which is rarer than people think. Seraphina considered this. And the mate bond, she said. In your world, has it happened to others? The recognition. Yes, Petra said. Not commonly. Maybe a handful of times in a generation. She paused. It's not a small thing, what he told you this morning. I want you to know that. Roman is not. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. He doesn't feel things by half. She stopped. He's also aware that you've had approximately the worst 24 hours of your life, and that you have every right to take whatever time you need to decide what any of this means for you. He told you that. Verbatim, Petra said. He was very specific. Seraphina leaned back against the chair. I was married, she said. 2 years. I know. I thought I could trust him. I thought. She stopped. I built my entire understanding of that house from what he told me. What he described to me. Because I couldn't see it myself. I had to trust that what he said was... I had to trust that the world he was building for me with his words was real. And it wasn't, Petra said quietly. It was a construction, Seraphina said. A set, built to keep me in one place. Silence. That's not what Roman does, Petra said. I'm not asking you to believe that now. I'm putting it in the record. Seraphina nodded. And then the vision came. It came without warning, the way the worst ones always did. She went rigid in the chair. She felt herself go rigid, felt the muscles of her back and hands and jaw all lock simultaneously, and the room dissolved. She had expected Dorian. She had expected the narrow pass, a repeat, a new angle. She had expected something she could map onto what she already knew. She did not expect herself. She was standing in a place she had never been. Stone floor under her feet, but not cold stone, warm stone, as if it had been absorbing heat for hours. The air carried incense, something ceremonial, and sound, voices, many voices, a crowd, the particular resonance of a crowd in an enclosed space. And someone was placing something on her head. She felt it. The vision gave her the physical sensation directly, bypassing whatever gap usually existed between her and the images. The weight of it, metal, cool and precise, settling against her temples and her forehead, heavy in a way that was not uncomfortable, but was unmistakably significant. A crown. Around her, the voices resolved into words. Not many words. One phrase, repeated. Different voices, different registers, spreading through the crowd like something being passed hand to hand. Long live the Queen. She heard her own breathing in the vision, steady, controlled, the breathing of someone who had made a decision and was standing in the consequence of it without flinching. And she heard, close to her right ear, Roman's voice. Not his king's voice, not the bedrock calm, not the careful, precise warmth of a man rationing himself carefully. His voice stripped of all of that. His voice at its most private, saying something she was meant to hear and no one else. You were always going to end up here, he said. I think you knew it before I did. The vision released her. She came back to the room gasping, smaller than the morning's vision, shorter, but more disorienting for reasons she couldn't immediately name. The chair was solid under her. The fire was behind her to the right, 7 steps to the door. Petra was beside her. She hadn't heard her move, hadn't tracked the transit, which almost never happened. Petra's hand was on her arm, not gripping, just present. I've got you, Petra said, calm. You're in the keep. You're safe. Take your time. Seraphina pressed her hands flat against her thighs. A vision, she said unnecessarily. Roman told me they happen, Petra said. He didn't tell me what they were like to witness. A pause. Are you all right? I don't know, she said honestly. Petra didn't push. She sat with her in the quiet, while Seraphina's heart rate made its slow way back to something functional. Petra, she said finally. Yes? In your world, she paused. Can a human be queen? The silence that followed was 3 full seconds. A human who is the Alpha King's mate, Petra said carefully, would not be considered entirely human by our law. The bond changes things at a fairly fundamental level. Another pause. Why? Seraphina shook her head. I'll tell you when I understand it better. She heard Petra absorb this with admirable restraint. All right, she said. Eat something first. Understanding things is easier with food. Soren's results came 2 hours later. He delivered them himself. She heard him arrive at the door, heard the slight shift in Petra's posture that suggested she had exchanged a look with him that Seraphina couldn't see. She noted this, did not comment on it. The blood confirms the exposure, Soren said, settling into the chair across from her. The specific compound is a derivative of nightwither root, not commonly known outside of certain very specialized circles. He paused. It's not a poison you acquire accidentally. It requires knowledge, resources, and access. He paused again. It also requires a period of sustained administration. It doesn't work in a single dose. Whoever did this was committed to the plan for the full duration. 4 months, she said. At minimum. Possibly longer. Some of the markers suggest the earliest exposure may predate the symptoms you identified. He let this sit. The good news is significant. You're here, you're functional, and your system has mounted a considerable defense on its own. The compound's effectiveness decreases in subjects with strong natural resilience, which you appear to have in abundance. A pause. The treatment will take approximately 2 weeks. Daily preparation, some dietary restrictions, rest. 2 weeks, she said. Yes. She nodded slowly. The legal question, she said. If I wanted to bring this before some kind of authority, would the blood evidence be sufficient? Soren was quiet for a moment. In human provincial law, potentially. In our law. He paused. In our law, harming a mate is a capital offense. The evidence required is significantly more straightforward. She absorbed this. I'm not his mate yet, she said. Formally. No, Soren agreed. Not formally. She heard something in the gap between those words. Something that was not pressure, not urgency, not the particular quality of someone waiting for her to arrive at the answer they already knew. Simply acknowledgement. The space between not yet and eventually left open and unforced. Thank you, Soren, she said. Rest, he said. That's your only task today. He left. Petra stayed until Seraphina told her, gently, that she would like an hour alone. Petra went without protest, leaving only the instruction that food had been placed on the table by the window, and would Seraphina please eat it. She ate. She sat in the chair by the fire afterward, with her cleaned and rebandaged hands in her lap, and the keep settling around her. The sounds of it, the particular rhythm of a large inhabited place, its breathing. She thought about a crown being placed on her head. She thought about you were always going to end up here. She thought about the pull she'd felt in that carriage in the dark, the gravity, the specificity of it, the way her body had registered it before her mind had any language for it. She thought about Dorian's hand finding hers in the dark, automatically, 2 years of mornings. She thought about the difference between a hand that finds you out of habit and a hand that finds you because it has no other north. She pressed her palms together. Not yet, she thought. You have things to do first. You have a husband who poisoned you. You have a sister-in-law who helped. You have an estate in Aldenmore with your name on a legal document and poison in its tea. You have a life that was built as a cage and will need to be dismantled before you can build anything else. Not yet. But underneath that, quieter, honest in the way that thoughts are when you're alone, with no one to perform composure for. You reached for him in the vision before you knew you were reaching. Your hands knew where he was. She breathed in slowly. The fire crackled. Outside the window, somewhere in the vast cold clean air of the Northern Territory, a wolf was howling. She tilted her head toward it. It sounded, she had no framework for this, no way to confirm it, nothing but the pull that had been operating in her chest since last night. It sounded like it was very close, like it was just outside the wall, like it was keeping watch. Chapter 6. By the third morning she had mapped the keep. Not all of it. Not the outer walls, not the lower levels she hadn't yet been taken to. Not the eastern wing that Petra had described as administrative, and therefore, in Petra's words, aggressively boring, and not worth your time yet. But the parts that mattered, the healing wing and its 3 corridors, the great hall whose ceiling she could feel from 20 feet away, in the way a hand feels warmth from a fire, the courtyard with its central fountain, whose particular gurgle she had fixed as a landmark the same way sailors fix stars. Her room to the kitchens, 43 steps, 2 left turns, 1 short staircase of 7 steps, straight on through a door that opened inward and smelled of wood smoke before you reached it. She had done it alone the previous morning, before anyone was awake, just to know she could. The cook, a woman named Bet who spoke with the accelerated enthusiasm of someone who had spent years feeding people and found every new eater a personal challenge, had simply handed her something warm and sweet without comment, and told her the kitchen was open before dawn if she ever couldn't sleep. This was the thing about the keep, she was finding. Nobody made a performance of her. The guards said good morning when she passed them, and didn't rush to escort her when she didn't ask. Petra walked with her when she wanted company, and left when she wanted silence, and somehow always knew the difference. Soren delivered her daily preparation with the same economical directness he apparently delivered everything, explained the changes he was observing in her markers with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who found bodies intellectually interesting, and did not once look at her, she assumed, based on the direction of his voice, with anything resembling pity. And Roman came every day. Late morning, first visit. Again in the early evening. He knocked and waited to be invited in, and he never stayed so long that she felt the particular fatigue of sustained performance. He brought her things without making a production of it. One morning a book, pressed into her hands with the observation that he understood she couldn't read it, but that Petra had told him she liked being read to, and he had a reasonable reading voice if she was interested. Another morning a detailed verbal map of the outer grounds, delivered with careful compass directions and landmark anchors, because he had apparently decided she should know where she was. He sat across from her and talked about the territory, about the northern geography, about the history of the keep in the dryly affectionate tones of someone who had been surrounded by it since childhood and had opinions about its architecture. He asked her questions and listened to the answers with the focused attention that had disarmed her from the first night and had not stopped disarming her since. He did not talk about the bond. She did not talk about Dorian. By unspoken, mutual, extremely careful agreement, they were building something that existed entirely in the present tense, and neither of them was looking at what it was directly, the way you don't look directly at a bright thing until your eyes have adjusted. It was, she thought, on the third morning, sitting by her window with her hands around a cup of Bet's tea. It was the most honest she had felt in years, the most entirely, specifically herself, not performing capability, not performing contentment, not mapping a house that had been designed to contain her. Just sitting, just being. She noticed this and felt it the way you feel an unexpected warmth, with gratitude and with the particular vigilance of someone who has learned that warmth can be engineered. Stop second-guessing it, she told herself. She listened to the wind, and then she noticed the smell. It was coming through the window gap, the narrow space at the bottom where the latch didn't quite seal all the way. Petra had mentioned it. Seraphina had not asked to have it fixed, because she had decided, privately, that she liked the thread of outside air it let in at night. The northern air, clean and cold and mineral. But this morning the smell was different. She set her cup down, pine resin, cold stone, and underneath it, unmistakably, impossibly, the warm earth smell that she associated with Roman. That she had been associating with Roman since the first moment she'd registered it in his carriage, and told herself she was noting it for practical reasons. It was stronger than when he was in the room. She stayed very still. Then she heard it. So quiet it was almost not a sound at all, more like the memory of a sound, below the threshold of what should have been audible through glass and stone. A breath, close. On the other side of the wall, just below her window. She thought about what Soren had said. The bond changes things at a fairly fundamental level. She thought about what Petra had said. He's the kind of king who will absolutely destroy you if you threaten something he considers his to protect. She thought about a wolf howling just outside the wall, every night, in the particular register of something keeping watch rather than calling out. Roman, she said. Not loudly, barely above conversational, through a closed window to the outside of a stone wall. The breath on the other side of the wall changed. A pause. Then, from just outside the door, not outside the window, the door, a knock. She turned toward it. Come in, she said. He came in. She heard immediately that something was different. His footfall slightly heavier, his breathing fractionally less controlled than its usual precision, as if he had moved quickly recently, as if he had, perhaps, transitioned from one location to another, very recently indeed. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she said. Were you outside my window? A silence. Seraphina. I'm not upset, she said. I'm asking. Another silence. Longer. Yes, he said. She absorbed this. Every night? Yes. She pressed her lips together, not against a smile exactly, against something more complicated than a smile. In wolf form. Yes. Because of the bond. Yes. He paused. And because the men from the Valley Road were part of a larger operation that we haven't fully identified yet, and the outer perimeter of the keep is more secure with a second. He stopped. That's also true, he said, more quietly. But it's not the whole reason. She considered. What does it feel like? She asked. The bond. From your side. He was quiet for long enough that she heard him cross the room. The chair by the fire. The familiar sound of him settling into it, giving the question the weight it deserved rather than answering quickly. Like a compass, he said finally. That's the closest I can come to it. I always know where you are, not precisely, not through walls, not from a great distance, but within a certain range, I know the direction of you. He paused. And when I'm not in that range? He stopped. What? She said. It's uncomfortable, he said. Not painful. Just persistently uncomfortable. The way a wrong note is uncomfortable. A continuous sense that something is slightly not right. He paused again. I'm told it becomes significantly more pronounced over time. Before the bond is completed, she said. Yes. She turned this over. And after? After is different. I've spoken to people who have completed the bond. They describe it as... He paused. They all use the same word, actually. What word? Quiet, he said. They all say it makes everything quiet. That there's been a noise they didn't know was there, running underneath everything, and then suddenly it isn't. She sat with this. That sounds like what it was like, she said slowly. When I learned to map a room. When I learned to build the architecture of a space from sound and air, until it was solid enough to move through confidently. She paused. There's a period before that. A period of being in a space you don't know, everything uncertain, every step a question, and then you learn it, and it becomes quiet, he said. Yes, a silence between them that was not empty, that had texture and warmth and the particular quality of two people arriving at the same place from different directions. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. I'm going to go back to Aldenmore. The quality of his stillness changed. Not to stay, she said quickly. Not to. I'm not going back to him. I need to be very clear about that. I'm going back to dismantle it. The marriage, the legal arrangements, the estate documents that have my signature on them. I need to face Dorian and Lyra in a context where I have... She paused. Where I have something. Evidence. Witnesses. I need Soren's documentation of the poison. I need... She stopped. I need to do it properly. Not just run away and let them continue. I know, he said. I've been thinking the same thing. She turned toward him. You have? You're not the kind of person who leaves something like this unfinished, he said. I worked that out approximately 4 hours after meeting you. He paused. I also have a personal interest in ensuring that the people who spent 4 months poisoning my mate are held formally accountable. The word landed between them. She didn't correct it. I had a vision, she said, 3 days ago, while Soren was examining me. She paused. I should have told you sooner. Tell me now, he said. She told him. The crown, the warm stone floor, the crowd's voice resolving into long live the queen, his voice at her ear saying, you were always going to end up here. All of it, the weight of it, the completeness of it, the way it had felt not like possibility, but like memory, like something being remembered forward. She told him without inflection, without editorial. The same way she reported the ambush visions, clinically, specifically, every sensory detail she could reconstruct. When she finished, the room was very quiet. You've had a vision of the future before, he said, and it came to pass. Always, she said. Then, I'm not making a decision based on a vision, she said, more sharply than she intended. She softened it. I've spent 2 years making decisions based on a version of reality that was constructed for me by someone else. I need to make this one, whatever this one is, based on what I actually know and feel and choose. She paused. Do you understand the difference? Yes, he said, without hesitation. I do. Good. Good, he agreed. And she heard something in it that was not quite amusement and not quite tenderness, and was somehow both. A knock at the door. Come in, Roman said. Caius. She recognized his voice now, could place it instantly, had catalogued it along with everyone else in the keep. My lord. The situation in Aldenmore. A pause. Report. Our contacts confirm that Dorian Voss has filed a missing person claim with the provincial authority. He's describing his wife as and I'm quoting directly, mentally deteriorated and dangerously confused, possibly suffering from illness-induced delusions, should be considered vulnerable and returned immediately to her family's care. Seraphina felt something cold move through her. Not surprise. She had known, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that this was coming, that a man who had spent 4 months being careful and gradual would not simply wait. He would construct a narrative. He would build a new cage using the same materials as the first one, her blindness, her vulnerability, the fact that any account she gave of what she'd heard could be framed as the confused testimony of a disabled woman in poor health. She had told herself not to underestimate him. She had still, she realized, underestimated him. He's going to use the illness against me, she said. He caused the illness, and now he's going to use it as evidence that I can't be trusted. Yes, Caius said. That appears to be the strategy. She pressed her hands flat against her knees. Then we don't have as much time as I thought, she said. The longer I wait, the more established his narrative becomes. She paused. I need to be in Aldenmore before he can fully construct it. Seraphina, Roman started. Soren said I was strong enough to travel in another 4 days, she said. I heard him tell Petra that this morning. She turned toward where Roman's voice had come from. I know you're going to argue that it's too soon. I know you're going to have completely reasonable concerns about the men from the Valley Road, and the unidentified operation, and my ongoing treatment. She paused. I'm asking you to listen to me instead. A silence. I'm listening, he said. He is building a world with his words right now, she said. A world in which I am confused, deteriorating, unreliable. He built the last world with his words too. Built it so carefully that I lived in it for 2 years and called it love. She stopped. I am not going to let him build another one. Not while I am standing here, fully in possession of my senses, with a healer's documentation, and a witness, and every word of what I heard on those stairs, still perfectly clear in my mind. Silence. 4 days, Roman said. 4 days, she agreed. With a full escort. Agreed. And Soren's clearance. Agreed. Another pause, she heard him stand. Caius, he said. Begin preparations. We ride to Aldenmore in 4 days. He paused. And find out who in our party passed our route to those men in the valley. I want that answer before we move. Already have it, my lord, Caius said. His voice was flat. It was Fenwick. 3rd guard, 2nd rotation. A silence that was a different quality than all the previous silences. Cold and specific and very brief. Handle it, Roman said. Yes, my lord. Caius left. The room was quiet again. Outside the window she could hear the courtyard below, the ordinary sounds of the keep's morning, people and horses and water, and the particular resonance of a large inhabited place going about its life. Are you afraid? Roman asked. Not in the careful therapeutic tone of someone managing someone else's fear. Genuinely asking. She thought about it honestly. No, she said. I was afraid in that house for months without knowing what I was afraid of. Now I know exactly what I'm walking toward. She paused. That's not frightening. That's almost a relief. He was quiet for a moment. In 4 days, he said, when we ride out, I want to read you something. Tonight, if you're willing. A pause. The account I've received of Aldenmore provincial law, the specific legal mechanisms available to you. Another pause. Knowledge is. I want you to have all of it before we go. She turned toward him. You're going to help me prepare, she said. Yes. You're not going to try to do it for me. No, he said, and she heard in that single syllable that he understood exactly why she was drawing that line and had no intention of crossing it. She breathed. Tonight then, she said, after supper. After supper, he agreed. He moved toward the door. Roman, she said. He stopped. The wolf, she said. Outside the wall. She paused. I don't mind it. A silence. She heard. She was almost certain she heard. Him breathe in the way people breathe when they have been holding something carefully for a long time and have been, unexpectedly, given permission to set it down. Good, he said. He left. She sat in the chair by the window with her hands in her lap and her heart doing something it had been trying to do for 3 days now. something she had been firmly redirecting every time it started. She let it, just for a moment. Just for the length of time it took for his footsteps to fade down the corridor. Then she straightened her spine. 4 days. She had work to do. Chapter 7. She smelled Aldenmore before she heard it. The particular combination of river clay and coal smoke and the oversweet rot of the tanneries on the southern edge of town. It hit her 20 minutes before the carriage slowed, before anyone said anything, before the road changed from the packed northern dirt she had memorized over 4 days of travel to the familiar cobblestone grid of the provincial capital. Her body recognized it. Her body did not want to be here. She pressed her feet flat against the carriage floor and kept her spine straight and said nothing about either of these things. Roman was beside her, not across the carriage as he had ridden on the first night, beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth along her left arm, a continuous, grounding presence that she had stopped pretending she wasn't grateful for somewhere around the second day of travel. Petra was across from her. Caius was outside with the escort, 12 men, northern livery, a visible and deliberate declaration. The provincial hall first, Seraphina said, not the estate. Agreed, Roman said. This had been the plan for 4 days. She had built it the way she built everything. From sound up, from detail outward, each step mapped before the one before it was finished. Soren's documentation was in a leather case on her lap, his formal seal pressed into the wax, his testimony written in the precise clinical language of someone who had spent 19 years making his findings impossible to dismiss. Blood evidence, timeline, the specific compound identified and sourced. The legal framework. Roman had read it to her over 3 evenings, cover to cover, and she had listened the way she listened to room layouts, absorbing, cataloging, finding the landmarks. Aldenmore provincial law was clear on poisoning. It was a criminal offense requiring immediate provincial authority intervention upon sufficient medical evidence. The missing persons claim Dorian had filed was civil procedure, easily superseded by criminal complaint. What she needed first was Fergus. Fergus Aldgate had been the Voss estate manager for 11 years. She knew this from memory, from 2 years of living in the house he managed, hearing his voice in the corridors, listening to the specific way he moved through a building he considered his dominion. Heavy footfall, slightly dragging on the left, an old injury she had always assumed. The particular cadence of a man whose authority existed in service of someone else's, and who had made an entire identity from that arrangement. She also knew, because Roman's contacts had confirmed it in the days before they left the keep, that Fergus had made 3 purchases from an apothecary in the eastern district of Aldenmore over the past 6 months. The apothecary in question was not the kind that advertised. The compound purchased was not the kind with common applications. Fergus was not the architect, he was the procurement, which made him the weakest point in the structure, the one most likely to fracture under the right kind of pressure, because men who act in service of other people's plans have a specific relationship with consequences. They hadn't planned for them personally. They had assumed someone else would manage that part too. She found him through Petra. Petra, who had been in Aldenmore twice before on keep business and knew the provincial hall's administrative staff, arranged a meeting under the pretense of an estate audit, a routine review of the Voss accounts, requested by the provincial authority in light of the missing persons filing. Perfectly procedural, perfectly unremarkable. Fergus arrived at the provincial hall's smaller meeting room at the 2nd hour of afternoon. Seraphina was already there. She heard him stop in the doorway. "Mrs. Voss," he said, and she heard it immediately, the specific register of a man encountering something he had calculated would not happen. Not fear yet, recalculation. The rapid shuffling of a contingency plan that had not included this particular variable. "Fergus," she said pleasantly, "please sit down." Mr. Voss was not informed that. "No," she agreed. "He wasn't. Please sit down." A pause, then the sound of him sitting, carefully, she noted. Not the heavy drop of someone comfortable, the careful placement of a man who wanted to be able to stand up quickly. "I imagine," she said, "that you're wondering how I'm here." Mr. Voss filed a... "Yes," she said. "He filed a missing persons claim, describing me as mentally deteriorated and dangerously confused." "I'm aware." She folded her hands on the table. Soren had cleared her for the bandages to come off 2 days ago, and her hands were her own again, steady on the wood. "I want you to look at me, Fergus, and tell me what you see." A silence. "You look, well, Mrs. Voss." "I look well," she agreed, considering that I have been administered nightwither root in graduated doses for a period of not less than 4 months, with the documented result of progressive neurological symptoms consistent with long-term toxic exposure. She paused. "Soren of the Northern Keep has provided a complete medical account. Blood evidence, compound identification, timeline reconstruction." She slid the leather case across the table by feel, accurately, landing it in front of him. "That's his seal. He's prepared to testify formally before any provincial authority." Silence. She heard Fergus's breathing change. "I don't know what you think." "I think," she said, "that you made 3 purchases from Aldgate Apothecary in the Eastern District between the months of first harvest and deep winter. I think the compound you purchased has one primary application, and I think that when the provincial authority examines those purchase records, which they will, because I am filing a criminal complaint this afternoon, your name will be the first one attached to the supply chain." The breathing was louder now, faster. "I didn't," he stopped. "I was instructed to." "I know you were instructed," she said, not unkindly. This was important. She had planned this part carefully, because cruelty would make him defensive, would make him protect the people who had given him the instructions. What she needed was to make him understand the specific, personal shape of what was coming for him if he chose the wrong direction now. "You were instructed by someone who will, at the first opportunity, position you as having acted independently. You know that. You've known that since the beginning, I suspect." Silence. "He'll leave you with it," she said quietly. "That's how it works. The person who planned it walks away, and the person who ran the errands stands in front of a provincial magistrate alone." She paused. "I'm offering you a different arrangement." "What arrangement?" His voice was stripped down now, no performance left in it. "A written account," she said. "Everything you know, who instructed you, when, in what terms, whether there were others involved. Signed and witnessed." She paused. "In exchange for that account, I will ask the provincial authority to consider your cooperation as a mitigating circumstance when they determine your case. And if I don't? Then I file the complaint with your name as the sole identified supplier, and you stand in front of a magistrate with the purchase records, and no context, and no one standing beside you." She tilted her head. "Dorian Voss has considerable social capital in this province. He will spend it on saving himself, not you." The silence lasted a long time, long enough that she heard the fire in the corner of the room shift, long enough that she heard, from outside the hall, the ambient sound of the provincial courtyard going about its afternoon. Then Fergus said, "I'll need it in writing. The mitigation agreement." "Petra," Seraphina said. From the corner of the room, where she had been so quiet that Fergus had apparently forgotten she was there, Petra said, "Already drafted. I'll need you to read it carefully before you sign. Take your time." A pause. "How did you—" Fergus started. "She's very organized," Seraphina said. Fergus's account took 40 minutes to dictate and sign. It was thorough. It was specific. It named Dorian as the architect of the plan with a level of operational detail that could only have come from direct instruction. Dates, amounts, the specific language Dorian had used when explaining what the compound would do, and how long it would take, and why it would read as natural decline. It named Lyra as a knowing participant. It named 2 others, a physician in the Western District who had provided the cover of routine house visits, during which the compound was introduced to Seraphina's food rather than her drink, and a solicitor who had been quietly preparing the inheritance transfer documents for months. She sat through the dictation with her hands flat on the table, and her face still, and her breathing even. She did not react to any of it. She saved that for later. When Fergus left, under the supervision of a provincial constable who had been waiting in the adjoining room, another of Petra's organizational contributions, Seraphina sat alone at the table for approximately 30 seconds. Petra did not speak. Roman, who had come in quietly sometime during the latter half of the dictation and was standing near the door, did not speak. She pressed her palms flat against the table. The physician, the solicitor, visits she had thought were routine care, she had thanked the physician, had offered him tea, had been grateful for the attentiveness of a medical professional who came to her rather than requiring her to navigate to him, had been grateful for the man who was putting poison in her food. Seraphina, Roman said, low, not moving toward her, leaving her the space. I'm all right, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking if you're all right, I'm here. She breathed. Lyra next, she said. Today, before word reaches her. The account was sealed as soon as he signed it, Petra said. It goes nowhere until you choose to file it. He has no way to communicate with anyone until this evening at the earliest. Still, today, Petra agreed. Lyra was at the Voss estate. Seraphina knew this because she knew Lyra, knew her rhythms, her patterns, the way she structured her days. Tuesday afternoons, correspondence in the sitting room. The same sitting room where Seraphina had dropped a teacup when the first vision took her. She did not go to the estate. She sent a message. The message was brief. It said, I'm alive. I'm well. I know everything. Meet me at the Crescent Tea Room on the Provincial Square in 1 hour. Come alone. If you don't come, the sealed account goes directly to the magistrate this afternoon without any opportunity for you to speak first. She signed it with her full name. The Crescent Tea Room was a deliberate choice, public enough that Lyra could not make a scene, enclosed enough that their conversation would not carry, familiar enough to Seraphina that she had an immediate spatial advantage the moment she walked through the door. She arrived 20 minutes early and mapped the room completely. Lyra arrived in 43 minutes. She came fast. Seraphina heard it in her footsteps before she was through the door, the quick light tread of someone who had been frightened into speed. She came through the door and stopped. Sarah, she said. The use of the shortened name, the name Lyra had always used, the name that had felt, for 2 years, like intimacy, landed somewhere in Seraphina's chest with a dull, precise impact. Sit down, Lyra, she said. Lyra sat. Across the table, close enough that Seraphina could hear her breathing, rapid, controlled with effort, the breathing of someone who had spent the 43 minutes constructing a position and was now rapidly assessing whether it would hold. I want to explain, Lyra started. I want you to listen first, Seraphina said, and then you can say whatever you need to say. A pause. All right. I know about the compound. I know about the physician. I know about the solicitor and the inheritance transfer documents. She paused. I know that you knew for the full duration. I know that you were in the room when Dorian discussed timelines. I know that you continued to visit me, to read to me, to bring me flowers, while knowing what was happening to me. She stopped. I want you to understand that I am not here to forgive you. I'm here because you are a secondary participant in what is primarily your brother's crime, and the provincial authority will treat that distinction differently depending on how you choose to proceed. Lyra was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different than Seraphina had ever heard it. Stripped, small in a way that had nothing to do with volume. I told him to stop, she said. 3 months in, I told him. I said it had gone too far, that I wouldn't. And then you continued to visit me, Seraphina said quietly. And you said nothing. I was afraid of him. I know, Seraphina said. I believe that. I believe you were afraid of him. And I believe that fear was real. And I believe it doesn't change what happened. She paused. But it is relevant to the magistrate. And whether it's relevant in a way that helps you depends entirely on what you choose to do in the next 10 minutes. A silence. What do you need from me? Lyra said. A corroborating account. Your version. In your words, with your specific knowledge, witnessed and sealed. She paused. And one other thing. What? Tell me, Seraphina said. Where Dorian is right now. Exactly. He was at the estate solicitor's office. Of course he was. She knew, hearing this, that he had been moving since this morning, that his missing persons filing was only the first layer of a strategy that included the legal consolidation of the estate assets and probably a preemptive account of her mental state, filed with the provincial physician's registry. He was not waiting. He had never been waiting. He had been building while she was gone, exactly as he had been building while she was there, and the only difference was now she could see the architecture. She could see it, and she knew how to take it apart. She filed the criminal complaint at the 4th hour of the afternoon. She filed it herself, stood in front of the provincial authorities' receiving clerk, Soren's documentation in one hand and Fergus's sealed account in the other, and stated her name and her complaint in clear, specific, unambiguous terms. The clerk, a young man whose voice placed him at the nervous end of conscientious, said, "And you are filing this in full possession of your faculties, Mrs. Voss. I'm required to ask." "You're required to ask because my husband filed a claim describing me as mentally deteriorated," she said pleasantly. "Yes, I am filing this in full possession of my faculties. I am blind, not confused. The distinction is medically, legally, and personally significant." She paused. "The Northern Keep's head healer has documented my cognitive function in the same report that documents the poisoning. Page 4, third paragraph." A pause. "Yes, Mrs. Voss," the clerk said. And then, quietly, with the specific sincerity of someone who had departed from their professional script, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Voss." "Thank you," she said. "File it, please." It was filed. She walked out of the provincial hall into the afternoon air of Aldenmore, with Petra on her left and Roman at her right, and the sounds of the provincial square around her. Merchants, children, the fountain in the center that she had used as a landmark since she was first brought to this city as a new bride. And she thought, done. The first two, Fergus, Lyra, filed. One more. The one who looked at her in a firelit room in the early weeks of their courtship and decided she was the perfect target, isolated, trusting, unable to see what was directly in front of her, and built 2 years of careful, patient, loving performance on that assessment. One more. But as she stood there with that thought taking shape, she heard something that tightened every nerve she had. Boots on the provincial hall steps, fast, multiple. And behind them, at a distance that was closing rapidly, a voice she recognized immediately and completely, the way you recognize a voice that has been your compass in every dark room for 2 years. Seraphina. Dorian. Not the warm, sleep-blurred morning version, not the version she had loved. This version was the one from the stairs, stripped of warmth, precise, and very, very angry. "Seraphina, I need you to come with me right now. You're not well, you don't understand what you're—" "I filed a criminal complaint 40 seconds ago," she said, without turning toward him, "with Soren of the Northern Keep's medical documentation and a witnessed account from Fergus Aldgate. Both are now in the possession of the provincial authority." Silence. The boots stopped. She felt Roman beside her, that change in him that she had felt at the Arrowmere crossing, the older, less negotiated thing rising beneath the surface. Controlled, precisely controlled, but present. "You have an opportunity," she said, finally turning toward the sound of Dorian's voice, "to say something true, possibly for the first time in 2 years. She paused. "I don't recommend wasting it." The provincial square was quiet around them. She heard Dorian breathe. She heard him understand. And she heard, in the quality of the silence that followed, in the specific texture of a man encountering the thing he had been building against for months, and finding it was not what he had built against at all, she heard him realize that he had miscalculated. Fundamentally, completely. He had built his world with words. He had forgotten that so had she. Chapter 8. The provincial council met at the first hour of the following morning. She had not slept. Not from fear. She had examined that possibility carefully in the long, dark hours and set it aside, because what she felt was not fear but something sharper and more specific, the particular tension of someone standing at the edge of the last thing between them and the other side of something enormous, a runner at a line, a diver at a height. She had lain in the room Petra had arranged at the provincial inn. Small, clean, north-facing, described to her upon arrival in careful spatial terms by Roman, who had apparently decided this was simply what he did now, described rooms to her, without ceremony or announcement, as naturally as breathing, and she had gone through it. Every word of Fergus's account, every line of Soren's documentation, every section of the provincial law that Roman had read to her over 3 evenings. She had gone through it all until it was as solid as a room she had lived in for years. She was ready. She was not ready for what Dorian had done overnight. The provincial council chamber was large. She mapped it from the doorway. high ceiling, the particular resonance of a room accustomed to formal proceedings, benches on both sides, a raised dais ahead where she could hear 5 distinct breathing patterns, slightly elevated, the council, 5 members, by provincial charter. She entered with Roman on her right and Petra on her left, and walked to the table she had been directed to, finding it by the sound of the clerk's voice, settling into the chair without assistance and without hesitation. Dorian was already there. She heard him, his breathing, his specific presence, the cologne he wore that she had spent 2 years cataloging as safe, and that now registered somewhere between neutral and nauseous. He was at the opposite table, and beside him, a voice she didn't recognize, measured, precise, the particular cadence of someone professionally accustomed to speaking in rooms like this one. A barrister. She had expected this. She had told herself she had expected this. She had not quite expected how prepared he sounded. The council chair, a woman, her voice carrying the particular texture of formal authority worn comfortably for many years, called the session to order. She summarized the complaint: criminal poisoning, sustained administration, medical documentation from the Northern Keep's head healer, corroborating witness account from the estate's former manager. Then she turned to Dorian's side of the room. The barrister stood. His name was Aldrich Wren, and he had clearly spent the night preparing, because what he presented was not a refutation of the medical evidence. He was too intelligent for that. The compound identification was too specific, and Soren's documentation too thorough, but something more subtle and considerably more dangerous. He attacked the context. The council will note, Wren said, his voice smooth and unhurried, that the medical examination in question was performed not by a provincial physician, but by a healer attached to the Northern Keep, an institution with which Mrs. Voss is now, by her own account, residing. He paused. The council will further note that the primary witness to Mrs. Voss's condition and her arrival at the Keep is the Northern Alpha himself, who has traveled personally to Aldenmore in what he characterizes as support of Mrs. Voss's complaint. Another pause. The question the council must ask is a simple one. What is the Northern Reach's interest in the discrediting of a prominent Aldenmore provincial family? Seraphina kept her hands flat and still on the table. The corroborating account from Fergus Aldgate, Wren continued, was obtained in a private meeting arranged by Keep personnel, without provincial oversight, from a man who was subsequently placed under provincial custody at the Keep's request. The circumstances of that account's production are irregular, at minimum. He paused again, with the specific timing of someone who had rehearsed this, and Mrs. Voss herself, for whom we have only compassion. Let us be clear. Mrs. Voss is a woman who has been, by her own medical records, in declining health for several months, who left her home alone, in a storm, at night, and was subsequently found by the very party who now presents itself as her advocate. He let that sit. The council must weigh a medical account produced by an interested party, a witness account produced under irregular circumstances, and the testimony of a woman in fragile health, against the record of a 2-year marriage with no prior complaint, filed by a husband of good provincial standing who has expressed nothing but concern for his wife's welfare. He sat down. The chamber was quiet. Seraphina heard the council chair make a small sound, not a decision, but the precursor to one, the intake of breath before someone begins to be persuaded. And she understood what was happening. He wasn't going to win on the evidence. The evidence was real, but he didn't need to win on the evidence. He needed to create enough doubt that the council would delay, refer the matter to a provincial physician for independent assessment, request additional documentation, allow weeks to pass while Dorian's narrative settled like sediment over everything she had built. Delay was his weapon. Delay, and the oldest tool in the world, making a woman who couldn't see the room appear to be a woman who couldn't see clearly. She felt Roman shift beside her. She felt his hand, under the table, move to the space beside hers without touching, offering, available, not assuming. She did not take it. Not yet. She stood up. Mrs. Voss, the council chair said, with mild surprise. Your advocate may speak on your... I will speak for myself, Seraphina said, if the council permits. A pause. Granted. She turned her face toward the room, not toward any specific person, but toward the space of it, the full acoustic breadth of it, The way she turned toward any room she was learning, taking it in, taking all of it in. Aldrich Wren has made a sophisticated argument, she said. I want to acknowledge that before I respond to it, because I think precision matters here more than it's been given credit for. She paused. He's right that Soren is a northern healer. He's right that the account he produced is the work of a keep physician, examining a woman who came to the keep for shelter and treatment. She paused. He is implying that this constitutes a conflict of interest. What he has not done, and what I invite him to do, if he's able, is identify a single specific error in Soren's findings. Silence. The compound identified is nightwither root derivative. The method of identification is blood analysis, with documented markers. The timeline is reconstructed from those markers and corroborated by my own account of symptom onset. She kept her voice even, clinical. She had practiced this, in her head, at 3 a.m, in the dark. This is not a question of who produced the findings. It's a question of whether the findings are accurate. And the only way to dispute their accuracy is to produce a counter-analysis, not an argument about where Soren works. She heard one of the council members shift in their seat. As for the account from Fergus Aldgate, it was produced with a provincial witness present, Petra of the Northern Keep, whose current role as a keep administrator does not disqualify her as a witness under Aldenmore Provincial Charter, Section 14, Clause 7, which requires only that a witness be of legal majority and not party to the transaction being documented. She paused. Aldrich Wren would need to demonstrate that Petra is a party to the account itself in order to challenge her witness status. She is not. She heard the barrister make a small sound. Adjustment. Recalibration. Good. And the question of the Northern Alpha's presence, she said. Yes, Roman of the Northern Reach is here. He is here because I was found in a road in his territory in a storm, injured and alone, after fleeing a house in which I had just overheard my husband and his sister discussing the timeline of my death. She let that word sit in the room exactly as long as it needed to. His interest in this proceeding is not political. It is personal. The council may make of that what it will. She paused. What I would ask the council to consider, she said, is this. She reached into the leather case on the table. She had organized it by touch. Soren's documentation bound with a cord on the left, Fergus's account in the center, and what she placed on the table now on the right. The third document, the one she had not yet introduced, the one that Petra had quietly obtained in the hours between Lyra's meeting and the filing of the complaint. These are the records of 3 purchases made from Aldgate Apothecary between First Harvest and Deep Winter, she said. The apothecary's own records, obtained under provincial commerce law by the authorities' clerk at my request yesterday afternoon. She slid them across the table toward the council. Nightwither root derivative, 3 purchases. The buyer's name recorded in the apothecary's hand. She paused. This document was produced by an Aldenmore provincial apothecary under Aldenmore provincial law. There is no northern involvement in its chain of custody. None. She sat down. The chamber was very quiet. The council chair said, after a moment, "The purchase records are confirmed by a provincial clerk?" The clerk, who was sitting to the right of the dais, said, "Yes, councillor. I retrieved them myself yesterday at 3:30. Another silence. Wren stood again. The council should note that the name on those records is Fergus Aldgate, not. Fergus Aldgate's account details who instructed the purchase and how the compound was subsequently administered, Seraphina said, without standing. Page 3, second paragraph. She paused. He was thorough. A murmur moved through the chamber. She heard it, tracked its quality, not the murmur of doubt, but the murmur of something shifting, of a room changing its orientation the way a compass changes when something magnetic moves close. She had them. She knew she had them in the same way she knew the geography of rooms and the direction of threats, and the difference between a voice that meant her harm and a voice that didn't. She had built this from the ground up, from sound and detail, and the particular architecture of truth, which was less elegant than the architecture of constructed narrative, but was ultimately, structurally, undefeatable. Wren knew it too. She heard him sit down without speaking again. The council chair called a recess. They sat in the antechamber. Petra was saying something to Roman in a low voice. Seraphina sat apart, hands in her lap, and felt the recess stretch around her. Then Roman came and sat beside her. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "I was prepared," she said. "There's a difference." "Not always," he said. She heard Petra move away, with the specific tact of someone who had decided that this particular moment didn't need 3 people in it. "When this is over," Roman said, "whatever the council decides, I want you to know that it doesn't change anything on my side." He paused. "The offer I made at the keep." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for an answer now." "I know that too." A pause. "You're going to keep waiting," she said, not a question. "For as long as it takes," he said, simply, without performance, the way he said everything that was true. She turned her face toward him. She was aware, in this moment, of the precise distance between them, the inches of air, the warmth of him across those inches, the pull she had stopped fighting somewhere on the road between the keep and Aldenmore, and had simply begun allowing to exist as a fact of her current reality, like the cold or the altitude. "Roman," she said. "Yes?" "After," she said. "When this is settled and I've had time to—" She stopped. "I want to give you an actual answer, a real one. Not a crisis decision, not a reaction to what happened to me. A real one, made from a place that isn't." She paused. "From a place that isn't running from something." She heard him breathe. "That's all I've ever wanted," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm telling you." The clerk appeared at the antechamber door. "The council is ready," he said. She stood. She straightened her spine. She walked back into the chamber. The council found in her favor. Not unanimously. 4-1, the dissenting vote cast by a council member whose voice she noted and filed. But 4-1 was sufficient. The criminal complaint was formally accepted, a provincial magistrate assigned, and Dorian Voss was taken into custody pending the full hearing. She heard him being escorted out. He said her name once, as he passed. Just her name, no sentence around it, just Seraphina, in the voice she had mapped as North for 2 years, empty now of everything that had made it a landmark. She said nothing. She waited until his footsteps were gone. Then she sat in the chair at the table in the provincial council chamber, with her hands folded, and the sounds of the room reorganizing itself around the outcome, the clerks gathering papers, and the council members moving, and Petra saying something sharp and pleased to Roman across the room. And she waited for the feeling, the relief, the triumph, the catharsis she had been building toward for 11 days, since she had run barefoot into a storm with nothing but thunder to guide her. She waited. Nothing came. Not nothing. There was something. A quiet, a completion. The feeling of a door closing on a room you are not going back into. But not the flood of release she had been expecting. Not the satisfaction she had been promised by every story she had ever heard about justice. She pressed her hands flat on the table. She thought, so this is what it costs. 2 years, the mornings, the counted knuckles, a voice aimed at her face, and a hand that found hers in the dark, and a life built from landmarks that someone else had placed, and then, carefully, began to remove. It cost exactly that. And the province could account for the compound in her blood, and the purchase records and the transfer documents prepared in anticipation of her death, but it could not account for the mornings. Nobody could account for the mornings. Seraphina, Roman, close. His voice at its quietest register, the private one, not the king's voice, not the public calm, the one she had heard outside her window in the dark. Come outside. The air is better. She stood. She went outside. She stood on the steps of the provincial hall in the Aldenmore afternoon, with the coal smoke and river clay smell of the city around her, and she breathed. Roman stood beside her, and said nothing, and was entirely present, and did not try to fix any of it. After a while, she said, "The vision I told you about, the crown." "Yes," he said. "I think I'm beginning to understand it," she said. He was quiet. "Not because of the bond," she said carefully, "or not only, but because," she paused, "because I just stood in a room full of people who could not see me, who had been told specifically not to see me, and I made them see me anyway." She paused again. "I want to keep doing that. I want to be somewhere that—" She stopped. "Somewhere that uses what you are, instead of working against it," he said quietly. Yes, she said. The afternoon moved around them. That's what the keep is, he said, if you want it to be. She turned her face into the northern wind, which she could feel even here, even in Aldenmore, carrying the pine and cold stone of a territory she had spent 11 days learning to navigate. She thought about a room she hadn't mapped yet. She thought about the particular pleasure, the specific irreplaceable satisfaction of learning a new room from scratch. Of walking into an unknown space with your hands out and your hearing tuned and your skin reading the air, and finding, step by step, that it holds you. That it was built to hold you. She breathed in. Let's go home, she said. She heard Roman go still. She heard, in the quality of that stillness, in the specific texture of a man receiving something he has been waiting for without letting himself fully believe it was coming, she heard everything she needed to hear. Yes, he said. They walked down the steps. Chapter 9. 3 hours from the keep, the world stopped. Not gradually, not with the tilting warning of her usual visions. It stopped the way a heart stops, completely, instantaneously, without negotiation. And what replaced it was not the elsewhere sense of a vision, but something she had never felt before. An absence. She was in the carriage. She knew this. She had the leather seat under her, the rocking of the wheels, Petra's breathing across from her, the sound of hooves and the guards' horses flanking them. All of it present and real, and exactly as it had been for the past 2 hours of road. And then the warmth on her left side, the continuous directional warmth she had stopped consciously noticing because it had become as ambient as temperature, as assumed as the ground under her feet, went out. Like a candle. Like something cupped in a hand, burning steadily, and then the hand opens and the wind takes it so completely that there isn't even an ember left. She made a sound she didn't intend. Petra said her name immediately. She heard the lurch of her moving forward in the seat, heard the concern in it, but Seraphina was already pressing her hand against the carriage wall, already calculating, already trying to locate what she'd lost, the way your tongue finds the place where a tooth was. Gone. The pull was gone, the compass, the persistent awareness of direction that she had been carrying in her chest since the night in the rain, the thing that had annoyed her, and then interested her, and then become as fundamental as orientation. Gone. Roman, she said. Not to Petra, not to anyone in the carriage, to the air, nothing. Petra. Her voice was very controlled. She was proud of how controlled it was. Where is Roman? He was riding ahead. Where exactly ahead? Petra was already at the window. She heard it open, heard her lean out. He was at the front of the escort, Caius and 4 guards. She stopped. Seraphina heard it too. In the sudden, terrible clarity of understanding what she was listening for, she heard the front of the column, heard the wrong things, heard horses without riders, the specific panicked percussion of animals that have been cut loose from direction, heard the absence of Caius's voice issuing orders. Heard, from ahead and to the left, off the road, in the tree line, sounds that were not animal and not wind. Stop the carriage, Seraphina said. The driver was already pulling up. She heard it, felt it in the wheels. Petra. She was reaching for the door handle. How many guards with us? Back section. 4. Seraphina, wait. How far ahead did the column separate? When did you last see Roman? 20 minutes. He rode up to speak with the forward scout, and I assumed. 20 minutes. 20 minutes of the warmth being present and her not noticing it had changed because she had been thinking about Aldenmore, about the council chamber, about the feeling of going home. She had not been listening. She pushed the door open. Seraphina, Petra's voice, sharp. You cannot go into a tree line in the dark. I can hear better in the dark than your guards can see in it, she said. Get Caius. Find out what happened to the forward riders. She was already on the road, her feet finding gravel, her hands out, her hearing expanding outward the way it did when she asked it to, widening, sharpening, the way a pupil dilates in low light. Stay with the carriage. I am not going to. Petra. She turned toward her. Please. A silence. Take this. Something pressed into her hand, a short blade, the handle smooth and weighted correctly. She didn't ask where Petra had been keeping it. Yell if you need us. We'll hear you. I know, Seraphina said. She moved toward the tree line. The forest received her the way forests always did, with indifference, with the specific democracy of darkness that treated the sighted and the blind with equal inconvenience, the same roots and low branches and uneven ground. She moved through it the way she moved through everything, hands reading the air, feet reading the ground, ears reading the world 10 feet in every direction like sonar. She followed the sounds. Not the horse sounds. Those were retreating, the animals moving away from whatever had happened. She followed the sounds underneath, the breathing, the specific, compressed breathing of people trying to be still. 12 yards in. She stopped. 3 heartbeats that weren't hers. She pressed herself against a tree trunk and listened. 2 of them were together, 6 feet ahead and to her left, breathing in the controlled rhythm of men waiting with weapons. 1 separate, further right, moving, circling something on the ground. Something on the ground. Her chest constricted. She did not move toward it. She moved toward the 2 together, because that was the threat that needed to be removed first, and because her mind had been running the tactical calculation since she stepped off the road, the same way it had run calculations at the Arrowmere crossing, and the calculation said, neutralize the active threat before you go to the person who is already down. Even if every particle of her wanted to go to the person who was already down. She moved left, circling, using the tree trunks to mask her approach. She had learned this, had been taught it explicitly by Caius on the second day of the journey back from the keep, who had apparently decided that a woman with her particular sensory capabilities should know how to use them offensively, and had spent an afternoon explaining the principles of sound-masked movement with the brisk enthusiasm of a man who had found an unexpected student. She got close enough to hear their armor, the soft creak of it, the metallic whisper of weapons held in readiness. Got close enough to hear one of them breathe in with the specific rhythm that preceded movement, a decision being made. She moved first. The blade Petra had given her was short, and she was not a fighter, had never been trained to fight, and she was under no illusion that she was going to incapacitate 2 armed men with a short blade and intention. But she knew something they didn't. They could not see her in the dark any better than she could see them, and she had been navigating by sound her entire adult life, and she was standing 6 inches to the left of the one on the right before he knew she was within 10 feet. She drove her elbow into the back of his knee. Hard, the way Caius had shown her, the joint that folds even under armored weight, and he went down with a sound of pure surprise, and in the second of chaos that created, she put distance between herself and the second man's position, and yelled. 1 word. Here. 4 guards from the road responded in approximately 6 seconds. She stepped back against a tree and let them. It took 2 minutes. 2 minutes of the specific sounds of a forest fight. Compressed, brutal, efficient. Because the northern guards were not ceremonial, and the element of surprise had shifted decisively. She tracked it by sound and stayed out of the way, and when it was over, she was already moving toward the right, toward the separate heartbeat, toward the thing on the ground. She dropped to her knees. Her hands went out. Found him. Roman was on his side on the forest floor, and her hands moved across him with the specific methodical attention of someone who has spent a lifetime reading the world through touch, finding the shape of him, the temperature, the points of injury. His breathing was present, labored, shallow in a way that meant pain, not damage to the lungs themselves. Her hands found the source. Left side, high. An impact wound. Blunt, she thought, not bladed. The shape of the damage wrong for a cut. A crossbow bolt that had been deflected by the armor, maybe, or the edge of a saddle. The armor had done most of the work, but he had hit the ground hard. Roman, she said. He breathed. Roman. She pressed her hand to the side of his face. Found it. Found the angle of his jaw. Held it. His skin was cold from the forest floor. I need you to tell me where you are. Tell me what you feel. A sound, not words. The involuntary sound of consciousness reassembling itself. There you are, she said, steadier than she felt. She had always been steadier than she felt. Stay with me. The guards are here. Petra will have Soren's kit with her. You're going to be... Seraphina, his voice, rough and badly damaged, and unmistakably his. Yes, she said immediately. Right here. The bond. He stopped, breathed. Could you feel it? Yes, she said. I felt it go out. A silence. She felt him process this, felt it in the subtle change of his breathing, in the way his hand found her wrist in the dark, with the same accuracy she found everything in the dark, the same uncanny, directional certainty. You came into the forest, he said. Yes. Alone. Yes. Seraphina. You were on the ground, she said. What exactly did you expect me to do? He made a sound that was, impossibly, given the circumstances, almost a laugh. A broken, pained, exhausted almost laugh. She pressed her forehead briefly against his temple. She hadn't planned to do that. It happened the way reaching for him in the vision had happened. Before intention, before decision, in the wordless operational layer that didn't consult her before acting. She felt him go very still under her hands. Seraphina, he said, quieter. Don't talk, she said. Petra is coming. Save it. She heard Petra, crashing through the undergrowth with admirable speed, and the short blade she had apparently kept for herself, arriving at the tree line with a guard's torch and Soren's traveling kit, and words that were too rapid and too profane to fully catalogue. He's here, Seraphina said, without lifting her head. Left side, blunt impact. Petra dropped beside them. The torch changed the space. She felt it in the warmth it cast, could track where it moved, heard Petra's hands working, efficient and practiced enough that she had clearly assisted Soren more than she had let on. You, Petra said, to Roman, with a specific fondness that was entirely failing to conceal terror, are the most difficult person I have ever cared about. So you've mentioned, Roman said. I will mention it again. Repeatedly. For years. A pause. Nothing's broken. The armor took most of it. You're going to bruise magnificently, and I'm going to make sure Soren uses the most unpleasant antiseptic he has, purely as punishment. Roman made that broken almost laugh again. Seraphina sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs in the dark and breathed, and told herself it was the cold, which it was not. They got him back to the road. 2 guards made a carry between them, and Roman bore it with the compressed dignity of a man in significant pain, who was refusing to make it anyone else's problem, which Seraphina found both admirable and deeply irritating. The attack was coordinated, Caius said, appearing from the forward section, with the clipped report of someone who had spent the past 20 minutes doing what he was trained for. Forward riders were separated from the main column by a decoy, a rider crossing the road wearing northern livery. False signal. By the time the forward guard responded, the main column was exposed. He paused. 3 attackers. We have 2 in custody. The 3rd did not survive. Who sent them? Roman. From the carriage now, his voice still rough. The livery they wore was provincial, Caius said. Aldenmore provincial. A silence. Dorian, Seraphina said. Not a question. He filed the missing persons claim, Caius said. He had documentation prepared. He had a barrister briefed and ready. He had this. He paused. This was not improvised. This was a contingency prepared in advance for the possibility that the legal route failed. She sat with this. He prepared for me to survive, she said. He had a plan for if I got out. Yes, Caius said. She thought about the 2 years of careful, patient, methodical construction. She thought about a man who had looked at a blind woman and seen a problem with a solution, and had then, with the same careful patience, prepared for every possible variable. Almost every variable. He didn't prepare for this, she said. No, Roman said, from inside the carriage. His voice was clearer now. Petra's work, whatever she'd given him. He prepared for a woman running alone. He didn't account for the keep. No, Roman said again. Caius said, the 2 men in custody will be transferred to provincial authority tomorrow morning. Combined with the council's finding today, the attack on northern personnel traveling under diplomatic protection constitutes a significant escalation. The provincial authority will have no choice but to... I know, Seraphina said. I know what it means legally. She did. She had already mapped it. The way the attack collapsed Dorian's remaining defenses. The way it eliminated any last argument that she was confused or unreliable, or manufacturing a narrative. You could not simultaneously claim your wife was a deteriorated woman experiencing delusions and also have organized an armed attack on the northern escort accompanying her. The case was closed. She knew it was closed. She was not thinking about the case. She was thinking about the 40 seconds between the warmth going out and her hand finding his face in the forest. 40 seconds in which she had been in a road in the dark with nothing to navigate by, and had understood, with a completeness that required no deliberation, that she was going to walk into the trees regardless. Not because of the bond. Not because of the vision. Because it was him. She climbed into the carriage. Petra moved without comment to the seat beside Caius that had been added for the journey, giving Seraphina the space beside Roman without making it a production. She sat beside him. He did not speak. She did not speak. The carriage began to move. The keep's road, north. The elevation rising, the air changing. She was aware of his breathing, still slightly labored, pain in it, but evening out, aware of the warmth returning beside her, diminished from its usual steady temperature but present, not the absence she had felt on the road. She found his hand, his right hand, the one she was not reaching over a wound to get to, resting on the seat between them. She covered it with hers. His fingers closed around her hand immediately, not tightly, with the same careful, measured, permission-asking grip that had characterized every time he'd touched her, but completely, no hesitation. "I felt it," she said, quietly. "When the bond went silent, I felt it the same way I'd feel if the floor disappeared." She paused. "I need you to know that." He was quiet for a moment. "I need you to know something too," he said. "What?" "When I was on the ground," he said, "the bond was silent. Because I was in and out, but I could feel you coming. Even when the bond was silent, I could feel you coming." He paused, like a direction, like a compass that works even when everything else has gone dark. She pressed her lips together. She thought about everything she had said to him about waiting, about real decisions made from real places, not from crisis, not from running toward instead of from. She thought about 40 seconds of absence. She thought about how completely, immediately, devastatingly she had known what to do. "Roman," she said. "Yes." "I'm not running anymore," she said. "I want you to know that I know the difference between choosing this and reacting to something terrible. I know the difference." She paused. "And I'm choosing this. I want to be clear that I'm choosing it." The carriage moved through the dark. His hand tightened fractionally around hers. "I know," he said. "I know you are." "I'm going to need time," she said. "Still, there are things to undo, and things to build, and I don't want to rush any of it." "I know," he said again. "We have time. But I wanted you to know," she said, "tonight, now, that the answer is yes." Silence. Full, complete, enormous silence. "Yes," he said, after a moment, and the word sounded, like the thing he had described actually. Like quiet. Like something that had been running underneath everything, a note slightly wrong for a very long time, finally resolving. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Not his injured side. His right shoulder, solid and warm. He rested his cheek against the top of her head. Outside the carriage, the northern territory moved around them, the pine and cold stone and dark sky of a place that was becoming, step by step, sound by sound, the most solid room she had ever mapped. She closed her eyes, which changed nothing about what she could see, but felt, somehow, like rest. Chapter 10. Spring came to the northern reach the way Seraphina had learned everything came here, without announcement, without ceremony, simply present one morning in a way it had not been the morning before. She felt it first in the air. The mineral cold of winter was still there. It would be there until well into the 4th month, Petra had warned her. Northern springs were not the soft, tentative things she might be used to from Aldenmore, but underneath it, threaded through it the way a single voice threads through a cord, something had changed. A warmth with intention, a direction in the light that pressed against her skin with more insistence than it had the day before. She stood at the window of her room, which she had mapped so thoroughly over 3 months that she could navigate it in her sleep, and sometimes did, rising in the night to sit by the window simply because she wanted to, and she felt the spring arrive. She had been in the keep for 93 days. She knew this the same way she knew everything, precisely, automatically, because her mind filed time in the same careful order it filed spatial information, and 93 days of the northern reach had accumulated in her, like sediment, layer by layer, until she could not have told you where the person who had run barefoot into a storm ended, and this person began. The answer she had come to understand was, they were the same person. She had never been a different person. She had been a person who didn't know what room she was in. Now she knew. The legal proceedings had concluded 6 weeks after Aldenmore. Dorian Voss had entered a formal admission before the provincial magistrate. Not out of remorse, she was under no illusion about that, but because the combined weight of Soren's documentation, Fergus's account, Lyra's corroborating testimony, the apothecary's purchase records, and an armed attack on northern diplomatic personnel traveling under provincial charter, had left him with nothing to contest and everything to lose by trying. He was sentenced to 7 years in the provincial correctional facility. The solicitor received 4 years, the physician 5. Fergus received a reduced sentence of 18 months in recognition of his cooperation, which was the arrangement she had promised him, and which she kept because she had promised it, and because she did not need his suffering, only his truth. Lyra was not imprisoned. This had been Seraphina's decision, made alone, without consultation, in a letter to the provincial magistrate that she had dictated to Petra, and then asked Petra to leave the room before she finished. She had written, Lyra Voss was a knowing participant in harm done to me. She was also, by her own account, afraid of her brother, and manipulated by him, for a period of years that predated my arrival in that household. I do not forgive her. Forgiveness is a separate matter, and my own business. But I do not believe that imprisonment serves any purpose in her case that is not better served by the formal acknowledgement of her participation, the loss of her social standing, and the permanent record of her cooperation with the authority. I am asking for conditional release with mandatory provincial oversight for a period of 3 years. The magistrate had granted it. She had not heard from Lyra. She had not heard from Lyra. She had not heard from Lyra. She had closed that door and walked away, and had not stood at it listening for a long time, which was its own kind of progress. The marriage had been formally dissolved on the grounds of criminal conduct 31 days after the council finding. She had felt the dissolution with the same curious absence of catharsis she had felt in the council chamber. Not nothing, but not the flood she had braced for. A door closing, a room she was not going back into. She had asked Soren, 2 days later, whether the complete treatment had concluded. He had said yes. She had asked him to confirm that there was no remaining trace of the compound in her system. He had said, none. Your system has been entirely clear for 11 days. She had nodded. Then she had gone to find Roman. She found him where she usually found him in the late afternoons, in the northern courtyard, the one with the ancient oak that she had mapped from every angle over 3 months, and could locate by the particular quality of wind moving through its branches, a sound unlike any other sound in the keep. He heard her coming and waited, which he always did, gave her the space to arrive on her own terms, which he always did. Soren says the treatment is complete, she said, when she reached him. I know, he said. He told me this morning. You didn't say anything. It wasn't mine to say, he said. That was yours to tell me. She stood beside him under the oak. I've been thinking about something, she said. Tell me. The night in the forest, she said. When I found you on the ground, I told you afterward that I wasn't running anymore, that I was choosing. She paused. I meant it. I want you to know I still mean it, that it wasn't the crisis talking. I know, he said. But I also want to be honest with you about something else, she said. The vision of the crown. I didn't choose this because of that vision. I chose it because of 93 days of being in a place that... She stopped, finding the words. That built itself around what I am, instead of requiring me to build myself around it. She paused. I chose it because of you reading provincial law to me at night, until I knew it better than the barrister who was using it against me. Because of the wolf outside the wall. Because of the way you describe rooms. She stopped again. And because of 40 seconds in a road in the dark, when I understood with my whole body what I would lose. Silence. The oak moved above them. I want to complete the bond, she said. I want to know what quiet sounds like. He breathed. Are you certain? He said, not doubting, offering her one more door to walk back through, the way he always offered, the way he would apparently always offer until she actively took the door off its hinges. Yes, she said, I'm certain. Then I have something to ask you, he said, something separate from the bond. She turned toward him. She heard him move, not away, but differently, a shift in his position, a change in his elevation, and she understood before he spoke that he had gone to one knee. Her heart did something large and disorganized. I want you to know, he said, from below her now, his voice pitched entirely for her, that what I'm asking has nothing to do with what my position requires or what the bond demands. I am asking because I want you beside me for every reason that has nothing to do with either of those things. He paused. I am asking because you walked into a dark forest with a short blade and no plan, and I have been completely undone since the moment I found you in a road, and I have no interest in being put back together. She pressed her lips together very hard. Roman, she said. Yes? Are you proposing to me under a tree? I am. Is this the actual proposal or is there more? There is slightly more, but I can condense it if... Don't condense it, she said. She heard him breathe, felt the almost laugh in it. Seraphina Voss, he said, will you be my mate, my queen, and the person who tells me when I'm about to ride into an ambush for the rest of my life? She stood under the oak in the first warmth of northern spring, with her hands at her sides and her spine straight, and the keep breathing around her. Its 1,000 inhabitants, its ancient walls, its forge smoke and fountain water, and the particular resonance of a place that had been, for 93 days, learning her shape while she learned its. And she felt the answer the same way she felt everything true. Before she thought it. Before she said it. Already there. Yes, she said. The bond completion happened 3 days later, at the new moon. Petra had explained the ritual, not in the breathless tones of ceremony, but in the practical, affectionate tones of someone who wanted Seraphina to know exactly what she was consenting to, step by step, without surprises. There was a bite. She had known this for months, had known it and filed it, and occasionally, in the quiet of the night, thought about it with a complicated mixture of feelings she had not fully sorted until the morning of the new moon, when she woke up and found that they had sorted themselves while she slept. What remained was simply, yes, this, him. The ceremony was small. Northern tradition, Petra had explained, was not performative. The bond was a private thing, witnessed by a handful of people whose presence was meaningful, rather than a crowd whose presence was political. Caius was there, which surprised her less than it might have 3 months ago. She had come to understand Caius, had mapped him as thoroughly as she'd mapped every other room in the keep, had found under the clipped professional exterior a man of profound loyalty and a dry, unexpected humor that surfaced in the specific company of people he trusted. She had apparently, at some point she couldn't pinpoint, become one of those people. Petra was there, which surprised no one. Soren was there as the keep's formal witness, and Bet, the cook, who appeared without being invited, and stood at the back and dared anyone to ask her to leave, which no one did. She stood across from Roman in the northern courtyard under the new moon, which meant nothing to her visually and everything to her in every other sense. The particular quality of the air on a moonless night, the specific stillness of it, the way sound traveled differently when the sky was fully dark. He spoke first. The words were old, older than the keep, older than the territory, worn smooth by generations of use into something that had lost self-consciousness entirely. She spoke after him. Petra had written the words in her hand and read them to her until they were hers. And then Roman's hands found her face, careful, deliberate, asking in the fraction of a second before contact in the way he always asked, and his mouth found the place where her neck met her shoulder and she felt everything. The bite was sharp and brief and almost immediately irrelevant, because what followed it was, she had no framework for this, had not been able to fully believe the descriptions she'd heard until it was happening to her. What followed was the quiet. It arrived like a room you have finally learned completely. Not silence. She could still hear everything, the keep and the courtyard, and Petra's deliberately controlled breathing, and the wind in the ancient oak. Not the absence of sensation. The quiet of something that had been running underneath everything, a frequency she had been generating without knowing it. A tension she had been holding in her bones since the night in the road, since 2 years of a life built from false landmarks, since a fever when she was 9 years old that had taken her sight and given her instead this particular, extraordinary, unasked-for way of moving through a world she could not see, but could hear and feel and know. The quiet of that tension finally releasing. She breathed. Roman pressed his forehead to hers. "There you are," he said. She reached up and found his face with her hands, mapped it, as she had been wanting to map it for 93 days, as she had been stopping herself from mapping it, because she needed to be sure first, needed to know the difference between wanting and needing and choosing. She mapped it now. The strong line of the jaw, the place where a scar crossed his left cheekbone, old, smooth, a story she would learn. The curve of his mouth, which was curved upward now, she could feel it under her fingertips. "There you are," she said back. The coronation came 4 weeks later. She had known it was coming, had been involved in every decision about it, had been consulted and deferred to and argued with in the productive, affectionate, occasionally exasperating way that was, she had discovered, simply how the keep made large decisions, loudly, together, with interruptions. She had not expected what she felt when she walked into the great hall. Sound, first. 1,000 people filling a stone hall, the acoustics enormous, the resonance of that many bodies and that much breath and that much... She searched for the word, anticipation. Yes, anticipation with a specific warmth underneath it. Not the cool, formal anticipation of ceremony, but something more personal, more felt. They were glad. She heard it in the sound the crowd made when she entered. Not the formal, trained response of people performing welcome, but the unrehearsed, immediate, human sound of people who had spent 4 months watching their alpha come back to himself and had decided, collectively, that the person responsible for this was someone they intended to keep. She walked the length of the hall. Alone. She had been clear about this. She walked it alone, her spine straight, her hands at her sides, her feet finding the floor with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who has learned a room so well she no longer needs to count its steps. She found the dais. She climbed it. She stood. Soren's voice, formal now, carrying the old words of the northern investiture with a gravity she hadn't heard from him before, all his dry efficiency set aside for this. Soren's voice began. And then she felt it. The weight. The crown settled against her temples and her forehead, cool metal, precisely made, heavier than she had expected, significant in a way that was completely physical, and also completely not. And the crowd. Long live the Queen. Exactly as she had heard it in a vision in an inn room on the second morning of her life in the north, when she had been wrapped in bandages and exhausted, and barely beginning to understand what she had run into. Exactly as she had heard it. She stood in it. Roman was beside her. She felt him. The familiar warmth, the direction, the quiet hum of the bond that had become as ambient as her own heartbeat. And he said nothing because this was her moment and he knew it. She turned her face toward the sound of 1,000 voices. She thought about a woman who had built her whole world from what other people told her was there. She thought about learning to build it yourself. She thought about running barefoot into a storm, with nothing but thunder to guide you, and arriving, improbably, miraculously, exactly where you were supposed to be. She thought about maps made from sound, about rooms learned by hand, about the particular courage of navigating a world you cannot see, and deciding, every single day, to navigate it anyway. The sound of the crowd filled the stone hall. She breathed. She let herself be seen. Epilogue. He healed. She became queen. The northern keep had its first blind monarch and discovered, over the months that followed, that she had already known the layout of every room she walked into before she walked into it. That she had been mapping the place since the first morning, cataloging every voice, building from sound up a complete and perfect picture of her home. In the spring of the following year, she had a vision she had been waiting for, without knowing she was waiting, warm and golden and certain, a small new heartbeat, a direction she had not yet learned to find. She went to find Roman. He was under the oak, she told him, and the Alpha King of the Northern Reach, who had faced ambushes and councils and the full weight of a province's legal machinery without once losing his bedrock calm, wept, quietly. With his forehead against hers, in the first warmth of a second spring, she held his face in her hands, and felt, in the quiet between them, everything the world had cost her, and everything it had, in the end, given back. And that is where we leave them, not at the moment of victory, though there was victory, not at the moment of revenge, though there was justice, but here, under an oak tree, in the spring, in the quiet. Thank you for spending this journey with Seraphina and Roman. If you made it to the end, if you stayed through the council chamber, and the forest floor, and the 40 seconds of silence in a road in the dark, then you already know that this story was never really about what was done to her. It was about what she chose, after. That's the part that kept me writing. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean this genuinely, because this is the question that has been sitting underneath the entire story. When Seraphina chose not to imprison Lyra, the woman who watched her being poisoned for 4 months and said nothing, was that mercy, or was it something else entirely? And here is the harder version of that question. Was it the right thing to do? Tell me in the comments. There is no correct answer. That's exactly why I'm asking. If this story moved you, if Seraphina's world found its way under your skin the way I hoped it would, share it with someone who needs a story about a woman who builds her whole world from scratch and arrives, in the end, exactly where she was meant to be. Until the next story. Stay brave in the dark.